The Lovable Liar. By W. C. Tuttle. Tacoma consisted of a little depot, a saloon, and a restaurant. Inasmuch as the saloon and restaurant were in the same building, it made Tacoma a two-house town. The railroad timetable showed that Tacoma had an elevation of 5,000 feet, and that certain trains would stop there on a flag. There was a wagon road of sorts from Tacoma down into the Moolock cattle country, and this alleged road also wound its way from Tacoma back to the mines of the Beerpaw district. The main street of Tacoma was this road, if it might be termed a street. In front of the saloon and restaurant was a long hitch rack, where a horse might have the privilege of standing at an angle of about 45 degrees. Just now it was after dark. The restaurant was closed, as was the depot, but from the open saloon door a shaft of yellow light illuminated part of the rough porch. Inside the saloon, 5 men sat at a poker table, playing rather indifferently. The stakes were not high enough to make it interesting for a tall, raw-boned cowboy, who yawned wearily and shoved back from the table. "I wish there was a hotel here," he said. "Ain't even a stable where you can feed a horse." "And that's whatever," agreed the proprietor. "Tacoma ain't no town, pardner. If I had a bed I'd offer it to you and your partner, but all I've got is a cot to sleep on." "It's about 20 miles to Moolock," offered the man who owned the restaurant. "The road ain't none too good, but ye can get a bed in Moolock." The tall cowboy yawned again and squinted at his partner, Sleepy Stevens. Sleepy was slightly below the average in height, with broad shoulders, slightly bobbed legs and a pair of perfectly innocent blue eyes. His face was angular, almost serious in repose, but at the slightest provocation it would break into a mass of grin wrinkles, like the ripples from a stone cast into a quiet pool. "What do you think about it, Sleepy?" asked Hashkniff Hartley, the tall one. "Shall we gird up our broncs and hie away for this Moolock town?" "Just so well as not, I reckon," said Sleepy. "Might as well be ridin' this set in here. I ain't held better than a pair of jacks since supper." "You fellers come in from the Beerpaw?" asked the saloon man. "Yeah," said Hashkniff. "We came in over the Grayling Trail. Some darn liar told us that there was a lot of unlocated land up there, land that was pretty rich, but he lied, as usual." "What kind of a country is this Moolock?" "Cows, mostly. Lot of good outfits. Frank Allenby owns the Half Circle Cross, the biggest outfit." Hashkniff looked curiously at Sleepy, who regarded him innocently. They cashed in their few chips, bought a supply of tobacco from the saloon keeper, and went out to the hitch rack. As they started to untie their horses, Sleepy grunted wonderingly. He had ridden a roan horse into Tacoma, but the horse he was looking at now was decidedly gray. Its head was hanging low with fatigue and its coat was drying rough with lather. He called softly to Hashkniff, who was doing a little swearing over his own discovery. "I've got a pinto," grunted Hashkniff, as Sleepy blurted out the fact that he had drawn a gray. There were only 2 horses at the rack, and only 1 rack in the town. Sleepy scratched a match and discovered that whoever had made the substitution had changed saddles too. "We've still got our saddles," he declared. "Now what in do you know about that?" Hashkniff untied his pinto and let it into the light from the saloon door, where he appraised the animal closely. It was sore-footed and weary. Sleepy walked in beside him, leading the gray, and was about to call to those inside the saloon to come out and help them wonder over it all, when a voice yelled out from the darkness. "Put up your hands, doggone ya!" A revolver flashed and the bullet bit a splinter out of the sidewalk. With an almost automatic movement, Hashkniff drew and fired at the flash, and at the same moment he darted out of the light and flung himself flat on the ground. Sleepy went headlong out of the illumination, rolled down the hill and came to rest behind a big rock. "Gosh dang ya, what did you do that for, Forty?" wailed a voice from the gloom. "Who in it told you to shoot, anyway?" "Don't walk into that light, Swan River," cautioned another voice. "They didn't go far. I've got to fix that gun of mine. It's too easy on the pull." "Don't get in that light, you darn fool." The 3 men had come to the saloon door, wondering aloud what it was all about. The saloon keeper carried a sawed-off shotgun, and at sight of him, the one called Swan River spoke quickly. "Hey, Pearson. This is the sheriff." "Hello, Swan River," called the saloon keeper. "What's all the ruction about?" Don't get in that light, warned the deputy, $40 Dion, whose gun was easy on the trigger. I tell ya they didn't get far away. Who you looking for? Asked one of the men in the saloon doorway. The men who own them 2 horses, replied Swan River Smith, the sheriff. They stuck up a train this afternoon, and we've been on their trail ever since. That's their gray and pinto. Hey, sheriff, called Hashkniff. Listen in. Then listen close. Them ain't our horses. I reckon the 3 men in the doorway can tell ya that we rode a roan and a bay into this place late this afternoon, and that we've been in there ever since. We just found that somebody traded horses with us, and was admirin' 'em in the light. That's the truth, said the saloon keeper. They sure did ride a roan and a bay, sheriff. Well, the sheriff seemed a bit dubious. If you say so, Pearson, I'll take your word. Come on in, gents. Hashkniff and Sleepy sauntered back into the light and looked at Swan River Smith and his elongated deputy. Swan River was small, gray as a rabbit, and with a pair of eyes as hard as granite. $40 Dion was almost as tall as Hashkniff, sat of face, and walked with a loose-jointed shamble that would cause one to suspect that he might fall apart at any time. I'm the sheriff of this county, said Swan River, after a close scrutiny of the 2 cowpunchers. Name's Smith. Hashkniff introduced himself and Sleepy, and they adjourned to the bar. You dongade near killed me, declared $40 mournfully. My gun went off accidental. I had sense enough to sidestep, and your bullet poked a hole in the air just after I left. And it ain't like me to think fast, either. Well, grinned Hashkniff, you can't blame me, pardner. One of you yelled for us to put up our hands and the other one shot at us. Excuse him, if you can, said the sheriff, I can't. Here's happy days and a blanket at night. They drank and rattled their glasses on the bar. Did ya take a good look at them horses, 40? Asked the sheriff. Aha. I was right, Swan. The sheriff accepted Hashkniff's tobacco and cigarette papers, which were also passed to $40. The question is, where did they go from here, observed the sheriff. I'll bet you $40 they headed for Beerpaw, said $40. They've got fresh horses now. And good horses, added Sleepy mournfully. I never heard of a lost horse that wasn't a good one, grinned the sheriff. Nobody ever lost a bad one. Ha, ha, ha. Well, there ain't no use tryin' to foller them 2 fellers now. Our horses are plumb whipped, so we might as well go home, I reckon. How much did they get? Asked Hashkniff. I dunno. They blew the safe on the express car and took what was in it. Cut the train in 2 and made their getaway near where they had the horses staked out. But the engineer got a look at the horses they used, and as soon as the train got to Moolock he told me about it. Me and 40 cut straight across the hills and are lucky enough to spot 'em. Since then we've sure burnt up horseflesh. Comes night and we kinda loses track of 'em, so we heads for here and finds that Pinto and Gray, standin' plumb in the light. You can't blame us for the mistake, can ya? Hashkniff laughed and shook his head. It was all clear to him now, and he did not blame the sheriff. I reckon we'll go to Moolock with ya, he said. Med them 2 horses are as fresh as yours, sheriff. Yeah, sure. Let's go. It's a long ride back there, but there ain't no accommodations in Tacoma. You know anybody down there, Hartley? Nope. Me and my partner rode into Beerpaw from over the Grayling Trail. We kinda had an idea we'd like to do some gold minnin', and we was told that there was plenty of good ground left up there, but there wasn't an inch. By golly, a moose bird has to keep in the trees to keep from being a trespasser. Shaw, that's all been located long ago. Well, let's have one more drink and pull our freight, gents. They told Tacoma goodbye, mounted the jaded horses and headed for Moolock. Seems to me that I've heard of Moolock, observed Hashkniff, as they jogged along over the dim road through the pines. The name is kinda familiar. You spoke of a feller named Allenby. Frank Allenby, said the sheriff. He's the biggest man in Moolock County. To hear him tell it, amended $40, Allenby thinks that his family is responsible for the risin' and settin' of the sun. S.A. fact. He tells it when to come up and when to go down. Didn't Allenby send some young feller to the pen a while ago? Yeah. a young feller by the name of Bud Bell.
Allenby didn't exactly send him to the penitentiary, but he was responsible for it.
Bud's out now. I ain't seen him yet.
Meb he hates me for what I done, but I had to do it.
The Bell family are kinda strong on hate. Allenby bought the half-circle cross from Henry Christman about 3 years ago. Allenby is from Philadelphia. Never seen a cow ranch until he hit this country. Hank Bell nested in on what Christman claimed as his own ranch, but Christman didn't own it. There was bad blood between Christman and old Hank. Christman tried in every way to oust old Hank.
Hank's cows turned up missin', some of them had their throats cut. But old Hank stuck.
One day him and Christman met on the street in Moolock and shot it out.
Christman got a bullet through one lung and old Hank got his right arm crippled for life. It kinda put a crimp into old Hank, as a gunman, so he spent all his time giving his son Bud a 6-gun education. And Bud was a darn good pupil. Then Christman sold out to Allenby, who tried to oust old Hank, but the old boy had a title to his ranch. It's a sore spot to Allenby, cause Hank's place has the best spring in the Moolock range.
Did they quit killin' off Hank's cattle? Asked Hashniff. Swan River Smith chuckled audibly. Yeah, you might say they did. The Bible says something about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
Anyway, Allenby got the deadwood on Bud Bell and sent him up for 5 years, but the law let him out in 2 years and a few days. Now I reckon Allenby is shaking in his boots for fear Bud will make him pay for that 2 years.
Allenby is rich, ain't he?
Yeah, I suppose he is pretty well fixed. And I'll tell you why, said $40. Allenby is so stingy that he wouldn't pay 2 bits for a front seat at the Custer battle if the original actors would come back and play it.
It's an honest fact.
To my way of thinking, Allenby is a big jughead, with too much money and a soul so darn thin that it squeaks in the wind like a fiddle string.
He wants everybody to know that he's from Philadelphia. That ain't nothin' eggin' him, said the sheriff.
Not that part, agreed $40.
I admire him for gettin' out that place. I've been there.
You mean you've heard about it, corrected the sheriff.
$40 subsided.
I've heard that men don't value their lives very highly in Moolock, said Hashniff.
Faso?
The sheriff seemed surprised. Some as cheap as $5,000.
Cheap, blurted $40.
My, I could point out a lot that wouldn't be worth that much per bale.
5,000.
Say, if I was St. Peter I wouldn't even accept souls from Moolock, unless they came prepaid.
$40 is a pessimist, explained the sheriff quickly. Yeah, and I'm a good Democrat. Folks was Baptists.
Tried to make me one, but the water was too cold that winter, and by spring I was all out of the notion.
I think we'll like Moolock, said Sleepy.
Everybody does, said $40.
I know at least 100 that couldn't even think of leaving there. Love their little city, eh? No, they're stuck on the little cemetery, chuckled the deputy. Ha, 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 ha.
I'll drink with ya in Moolock. They laughed and rode down the last of the steep grades into the valley of the Moolock. The moon had lifted above the timbered slopes of the mountains, bathing the hills and valleys in a blue haze. Far off to the left a light twinkled from a window. That's the 27A ranch, said the sheriff.
Joe Bass owns it.
Joe's part Nez Perce, quarter breed, I reckon. Mine's his own business.
Been here a long time.
Ships quite a lot of stock. Moolock is the shipping center, ain't it? Asked Hashniff.
Most of it goes from there.
It's kinda in the center of the valley, so mostly everybody trades there.
I was just wondering what you meant about human life being cheap in Moolock. Nothin' much, laughed Hashniff.
I heard that a certain man, only put that much value on his life. Well, I dunno, said the sheriff thoughtfully.
I suppose that some folks feel that-a-way about money.
I'd hate to sell mine for that. And yet you take a chance every day for so much per month.
Yeah, that's a fact. You fellers aim to get jobs over here? Meb.
Fellers got to eat.
They sure do. Ya might see Allenby.
Jim Merton might need a man. He runs the Arrowhead brand, and his iron is on lots of cows.
Them two are the biggest outfits. You'd like Jim. He's young and full of ambition. Do you think we'd like Allenby? Well, you might. It takes all kinds of folks to make up a world. What's meat for one man is poison for another. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning when they rode into the town of Moolock, stabled the horses and got a room at the one little hotel. They were too tired to investigate the town, and even the hard mattress of their bed felt like downy feathers. It's funny how things work out, observed Hashkniff, as they stretched out in bed. We never had any idea of runnin' into this place. It's the same Allenby, ain't it? Asked Sleepy. Sure. Bob Freeman said in his letter that it was Allenby of Moolock, so it must be the same feller. He spoke about the feller that Allenby sent to the penitentiary, and about the old man. They are the ones that are stealin' Allenby's cows, eh? Thus Sleepy, with interest. The ones he said he'd pay us $5,000 for, if we could convict him. If we could. Hashkniff laughed. Allenby wants his detective work done on commission, Sleepy. He's afraid of his life, that's what's the matter with him. And he values it at $5,000. Probably all it's worth, laughed Sleepy. In a different environment Hashkniff Hartley might have been a famous detective. His mind was quick to grasp the important points of a case, and that, combined with what a gambler would call a hunch, had enabled him to solve some of the mysteries of Cowland, which had baffled even the best operatives of the cattle associations. Both he and Sleepy Stevens were top-hand cowboys, but fate had always thrown them into troubled ranges where their detective ability was of more demand than their ability to handle cattle. It was a hazardous calling, and of little remuneration. Their fame had spread from range to range, and the repeated telling in Cowtown, Bunkhouse, and around the campfires had exaggerated their ability until they became a bugaboo to those outside the law on the ranges. But there was nothing superhuman about either of them. There was nothing marvelous about their gunplay, neither could they whip their weight in wildcats. Yet they had left behind them a trail of righted wrongs, and a memory of two big-hearted cowpunchers who fought with a grin, asking no favors of anyone, riding away ahead of thanks or remuneration, if possible. There were homes on the ranges where these two men were mentioned in the evening prayer, and there were places where their names brought forth a curse and the hope that they would never come back. Still they rode on with a grin on their lips, knowing that fate had marked them for certain duties. And they were both confirmed fatalists, facing death with a grin, because they felt that they would never die until the moving finger on the big book wrote finest after their names. It was just breaking day the following morning, when Chet Hoban, foreman of the Half Circle Cross, and Omaha Olson, one of the Half Circle Cross cowboys, rode through the main street of Moolock, which was the only street in the town. It was a crooked street as well as a narrow one, bordered with false-fronted buildings, of which the livery stable was the most pretentious. The next building in size was the Elk Saloon and Gambling House, with its spacious hitch rack crowding close to the narrow sidewalk. Next to the Elk Saloon was the Blue Front Cafe, with only the name to indicate that at some remote time it might have been painted. Adjoining this building was the White Horse Saloon. Across the street from the Elk Saloon was the sheriff's office. On this side of the street were more saloons, a general merchandise store, post office, stage station and other small business necessary to the comfort of rangeland humanity. The Moolock Hotel was neither of great size nor elegant in appointment, but it served. Its sign read, Moolock Hotel. Frosty Welcome Prop. Which, as a cowboy had said, if you don't get treated well, you've been warned ahead of time. But Frosty Welcome was only Frosty by nickname and not by nature. The two cowboys rode through town and cut across a flat toward the big loading corrals near the depot. A string of cattle cars were being shunted onto a spur track by a freight engine, as they rode up to the corral fence and tied their horses. Chet Hoban was a thin-faced, raw-boned man, whose hair was plentifully dusted with gray, and whose humped shoulders and bowed legs gave him the appearance of one who bears a mighty burden on his back. His boot heels were run over on the outer side, which caused him to walk jerkily lest he sprain his ankles. Omaha Olson was taller than Hoban, and even leaner of frame. His eyes were sad, in fact his whole mien bespoke a great sadness, and his long nose, slightly twisted at the bridge, showed blue veins, as though it might be perpetually damp and cold. The engine uncoupled and went puffing back toward the depot, while Hoban and Olson crossed the track, circled the corral and stopped. For a space of several moments they surveyed the empty corral and then, as if by mutual consent,
they climbed to the wide plank of the top and gazed across the different pens, their faces filled with an expression of wonderment. Then Hoban circled to the main gate, where he sat down and looked at the broken padlock, which dangled from a twisted staple.
Omaha Olson came up and peered down at it.
Then he produced his tobacco and papers and began calmly rolling a cigarette, while Hoban turned and gazed off across the rolling hills.
"They done busted the lock," said Omaha.
Hoban squinted at him, but did not reply.
"The busted lock needed no explanation." 300 of 'em, too, observed Omaha.
"You keep on and there won't be nothing to tell about," said Hoban a trifle sarcastically.
"And Allenby will just about bust a gizzard." Thus Omaha, ignoring Hoban.
"I see him commencin' to get red and swell up like a carbuncle.
My, this'll sure ache him all over."
"You'd ache if somebody stole 300 two-year-old Herefords from ya," retorted Hoban.
"I'd ache if I ever had that many. Now what in will we do with these cars?" Hoban got to his feet, shaking his head. "Let Clayton worry about that. Come on."
They climbed down and went to their horses, which they mounted and rode back into town. The sheriff was still asleep, but Hoban hammered on the office door and woke him up. "Last night we had 300 two-year-old Herefords in the loading corrals, Sheriff."
"They were to be loaded this morning."
"Somebody smashed the padlock on the main gate and swiped the whole herd." Swan River scratched his head thoughtfully.
"Well," he said slowly, "that was worth talking." "Smashed the padlock, eh?"
"That's a penitentiary offense." "Took 300 half-circle cross Herefords, eh?"
"Gosh. Somebody held up the train yesterday, too, Chet. Dongade Country is going to the dogs." "Allenby know?" "Not yet. We just found it out." "We better find Clayton," said Omaha.
"He'll likely want to see about them cars." "I'll get on some clothes right away and see what I can find out," offered the sheriff, turning back into the office. Hoban and Omaha walked up to the hotel, where they found Ed Clayton, the cattle buyer, just ready to leave for the loading pens. Clayton was a big man, without an ounce of fat on his huge frame. He was not unhandsome, dressed well, and was not over 35 years of age. Clayton was an inveterate gambler, a plunger, and his eyes were still heavy from a long session of poker at the Elk. In a few short words Hoban told him what had happened. "Sounds like a fairy story," said Clayton, but quickly corrected himself with, "You know what I mean, Hoban, it don't seem possible."
Hoban relaxed and nodded shortly. He and Clayton had never been very friendly.
"Meb it don't sound possible," said Hoban slowly, "but they're gone."
"What about your cars?" "And nothing to put in 'em," muttered Clayton. "Well, I'll have to see what can be done. Want to walk up to the depot?" "All right. Allenby will be here pretty soon."
The freight was still at the depot and Clayton immediately explained the situation to the agent.
"I'll tell you what we can do," suggested the agent. "We can send them up to Blue Joint.
Old Sam Bass has been yelling for cars for 3 days.
He's got some stock to ship. Shall I take that chance?" "Go ahead," urged Clayton. "I don't want the darn things."
"If Bass can use 'em, he's sure welcome." Blue Joint was merely a siding and a loading corral about 10 miles from Moolock. It was sometimes used by the ranchers of that side of the valley in making small shipments, and was located about 2 miles from the 27A ranch. The train crew grumbled audibly, but added the cattle cars to the train, took their orders and steamed away across the valley, while Clayton, Hoban and Omaha went back to wait for Allenby, who rode into town in a buckboard drawn by a pair of cream-colored horses.
Frank Allenby was about 50 years of age, portly and important. When $40 Dion had declared that Allenby thought the sun arose and set because of the Allenby family, he was not so far wrong. Allenby had a square, protruding jaw, which accentuated the flatness of his cheekbones, and beneath a slightly hooked nose he wore an aggressive, brush-like, gray mustache. His suit was of black broadcloth, his boots of finest leather, and his hats were made to order. But he wore an old-fashioned, stiff-bosomed shirt, sans collar, but with a huge onyx button, while his cuffs were fastened together with big cameo cuff buttons. He wore no vest. From a suspender stay dangled a solid gold watch chain, each link at least an inch long. Hoban met him at the hitch rack and tied the team,
while Allenby got ponderously from the buckboard, the springs of which seemed to sigh with relief. He looked questioningly at Hoban, as though wondering why he was not busy at the loading pens. He could also see Omaha Olson and Ed Clayton standing in front of the Elk Saloon. It did not take Hoban long to inform Allenby of his loss, and the big man stiffened, as though to withstand a physical blow. His face paled with anger, and then he hunched forward, as if to grapple with his foreman.
"Gone," he muttered thickly. "You mean that someone stole them?"
"You might say they have," said Hoban slowly. "The padlock on the big gate has been smashed. I told the sheriff about it."
Allenby shook his head like a wounded bull.
The pocketbook was Frank Allenby's vital spot, and it nauseated him to think of losing those Herefords. Then he shut his teeth with an audible snap and surged ahead toward the Elk Saloon, where he stopped in front of Omaha and the cattle buyer.
"I know about it," said Clayton sympathetically. "Bye, I know about it, too," roared Allenby. He was almost crying with anger.
"I know who stole those Herefords."
"Bye, I know. I'll. Go ahead and tell me who stole em." Swan River Smith had crossed the street unnoticed and had heard Allenby's statement. Allenby turned his head and glared at the sheriff. But Allenby's glare did not affect Swan River in the least. The big cattleman's dominating personality meant nothing to the little sheriff. "Go ahead," urged Swan River. "I'd sure like to hear his name." "That's my business," snapped Allenby. "And mine," added the sheriff.
"If you know who stole your cows, tell me his name."
"If you don't know, Allenby, if you're only making a wild guess, keep it to yourself." "I'll do as I please." "Yeah?" Swan River looked him over coldly. "All right. Free speech is your right, Allenby. But if you ain't got evidence enough to back up the name you mention, the law ain't backing you." "I don't need the law. I'll be my own law, bye." "Ha!"
Thus the sheriff softly, as he turned and walked back toward his office.
Allenby glared after him.
Omaha and Clayton smiled, but Hoban's face did not change a line.
"Little pup,"
sneered Allenby, half under his breath, but the sheriff was too far away to hear it.
"He isn't much," agreed Clayton. Hoban looked sharply at the cattle buyer.
Hoban knew that Swan River Smith was a thoroughly capable officer, with a fine record behind him.
"Do you know who stole em?" asked Omaha innocently. "Do I know who stole em?" parroted Allenby. "I do know." "Well, let's go and get em back." "Fool," snorted Allenby. "Do you suppose they'd leave em where we could find em?"
He spat viciously and turned to Clayton.
"When will your man be here, Ed?" "He's due any time now."
"You just keep calm and let Jim Seeley work on this case. He'll put a stop to it."
"That's the detective?" asked Omaha.
"SHHHH,"
cautioned Clayton. "Don't tell everybody about it." "I hope he can handle it," said Allenby wearily. "I can't stand losing any more stock."
"Freeman, the secretary of the association, promised to furnish me with a couple of men, who, he said, are the best in the world on this kind of a case. But they refused to take it. I offered them $5,000 for a conviction, but they refused. I know who is doing the dirty work, Clayton. I know it just as well as if I had a confession from them, but I need evidence. Nobody else is losing stock.
It's spite work, that's all it is. For over 2 years I've been losing cattle.
I sent one man to the penitentiary, and next time I'll send 2.
If I don't stop em, I'll be broke. I'm going home now."
"You heard about the train robbery, didn't you?" asked Clayton.
"Yes.
The sheriff chased them to Tacoma, but they got away into the beer paw country."
"Suppose there's any connection between the train robbery and the rustlers?" "No. Too far apart. Are you coming out to the ranch today?" "I may be out later."
Hoban untied the team and watched Allenby ride back toward the ranch, before joining Omaha and Clayton at the Elk Bar.
Hashkniff and Sleepy had finished their breakfast in time to see Allenby right away.
The sheriff was standing in the doorway of his office when they arrived, and told them that the big man was Frank Allenby.
"Allenby ain't no woolly little sheep when he's contented," explained Swan River, "so right now he's a ragin' wolf with nothin' in sight to bite into.
Somebody busted into the Loudon pens last night and lifted 300 Hereford cows that were due to take a railroad ride this morning, but lifted 'em out of a Loudon pen, eh? Grinned Hashkniff. I'll tell a man that's the real handy way to get 'em.
Sheriff, I'm of the opinion that this county ain't so law-abiding that it aches.
Nah, she ain't, agreed $40, trying to get a number 9 foot into a number 7 boot. If you was a deputy sheriff here for a while you'd find out.
This here ain't no office, it's a job, why betcha? Any clues left by the light-fingered gents? Asked Sleepy. Swan River shook his head. Not a clue.
There's so darn many cow tracks in this country, and no rain for 2 months, that you never could trail 'em.
Just have to trust to luck, eh? Thus Hashkniff, interested. Yeah, luck. Have much rustlin' to contend with? Not so much. It's a queer thing about the rustlin'.
Somebody has been stealin' cows from Allenby for over 2 years. I've tried every scheme I could think of to nail the guilty party or parties, but they're too slick for me.
Only from Allenby? Queried Hashkniff. He's the only one that reports a loss. Hashkniff squinted thoughtfully. Kinda looks like somebody had a grudge against Mr. Allenby, don't it? Do you think so? Well, what do you think, Sheriff? Swan River Smith rubbed his chin thoughtfully. He knew who Allenby suspected.
There was a dead weight of evidence against that party right now, but Swan River wanted to be fair. He did not know who Hashkniff and Sleepy were, except their names, and he did not want to make any mistakes.
We don't want to horn into your business, said Hashkniff, reading the sheriff's hesitancy. It ain't nothing to us, you see. We'd kinda like to get our broncs back though.
Them was sure 2 gosh awful good horses.
Swan River looked up grinning.
I'll bet you they were, he said. I'd just like to help you get 'em back, to see how good they are.
Come on out to the stable.
They went out through the rear door, with $40 bringing up the rear, stamping his feet to try and stretch his boots. If facial expression means anything, he was accomplishing little. These are dude boots, he explained to Sleepy.
When I dress to kill. Yourself? Asked Sleepy innocently.
$40 grinned painfully and rested on his high heels, bracing one hand against the stable door, while the others went inside. I want you to take a look at the gray and the pinto, said Swan River, pointing out the 2 horses in adjoining stalls. Hashkniff looked them both over carefully and came back beside the sheriff.
Notice the brands? Asked the sheriff. Both HB animals, said Hashkniff. No other brands.
The sheriff squinted at the rumps of the 2 horses, chewing reflectively on a straw. I didn't need to look at the brands, he said slowly. I knew the 2 horses we were chasing yesterday.
You couldn't mistake that pinto. That black head shows it up a mile away.
And there ain't many gray horses bein' rode around here.
Kinda looks like Hank Bell's goose was about cooked, observed $40, limping in from the doorway. That'll be about all from you, said the sheriff. You're just pessimistic from tight boots.
They went back to the office, where $40 managed to take off the offending, if gaudy, footwear and put on his old boots.
Them that wants to be dudes can be dudes, he declared. If I can find the drummer what sold me that pair of boots, I'll kick him 7 times with each one. I want food, by golly.
You fellers had breakfast yet?
Yeah. Well, I reckon I can eat by my lonesome.
$40 grabbed his hat and crossed the street to the Blue Front restaurant, while the other 3 men lounged in the doorway of the office, smoking thoughtfully.
A man rode in past them and dismounted at the Elk Saloon.
He was not many years past his majority, a thin-faced youth and rather frail of physique.
That's Allenby's son, said the sheriff. Harry Allenby.
The old man thinks that Harry is the finest piece of manflesh that ever was whelped. I dunno what he's ever going to make out of the kid. Allenby is so stingy that he wouldn't let the kid go to college, yet he expects him to be president of the United States, I reckon. Kinda figures to have him be a self-made man, smiled Hashkniff.
Something like that. I like Mrs. Allenby. She's sure a nice little woman, too nice for Allenby. And June is a dinger. June is the daughter. She's about a year younger than Harry, and I reckon he's about 24 now.
While they were discussing the Allenby's affairs, two more riders came into the far end of the street and rode toward them.
Swan River squinted thoughtfully, watching them ride to the Elk Saloon rack.
"There's Bud Bell and Sticky Clay," said Swan River.
"Bud is the one on this side, the feller that Allenby sent to the penitentiary. Clay rides for the HB outfit, and he's a gunman if there ever was one." Oh. Come on."
The two men had tied their horses and were going toward the saloon door. Swan River stepped off the sidewalk and hurried toward the saloon. After a moment of hesitation, Hashkniff and Sleepy hurried after him.
"There's 3 men from Allenby's in there," explained Swan River, as they reached the sidewalk. "Mebbe it won't mean anything, but you never can tell."
As they went inside, Clayton was just buying some chips and a poker game, while Omaha and Hoban were deep in the mysteries of trying to play pool on an uneven table, on which the cushions were as dead as strips of mattress. Harry Allenby was at the bar, with a bottle at his elbow, squinting sidewise at Bud Bell and Sticky Clay, who were also at the bar, being served by Snowy Barnett, the proprietor. As far as outward appearances went, there was no cause for the sheriff to feel any uneasiness.
Bud turned his head and looked at Swan River Smith.
It was their first meeting since Bud had come back from the penitentiary. But if Bud felt any malice toward the sheriff, his gray eyes did not show it. "Hello, Bud," said the sheriff softly.
"Going to shake hands with me?"
A slight smile flashed across the young man's thin lips and he nodded quickly, as he held out his hand.
"Why shouldn't I, Swan River?" he asked. "You wasn't to blame."
They shook hands solemnly. Omaha and Hoban stopped playing long enough to observe this meeting, and those in the poker game were silent until it was over.
Harry Allenby took a lonesome drink and braced his elbows on the bar, hooked one heel over the bar rail and studied the poker players. "Howdy, Clay," said the sheriff. Sticky Clay grinned, showing 2 rows of bad teeth, and motioned for the sheriff to join them in their drink. Clay was wry-necked, sallow-complexioned, and almost bald.
He seemed to be in bad health, but those who had had trouble with him declared that there was nothing sickly about him. "Invite your friends," said Sticky, noticing that Hashkniff and Sleepy were with Swan River. "I'll take a cigar," said Hashkniff. "Little too soon after breakfast to drink."
"That's all right," grinned Clay. "I don't diagnose no man's inside workins. Everybody set? Here's hopin' you never get caught."
"Here's hopin' I don't have to catch ya," smiled the sheriff.
Harry Allenby laughed harshly.
The saloon went silent.
Swan River had spoken loud enough for everyone to hear. "You won't have to," said Harry meaningly.
"A sheriff can do as he pleases." Swan River's eyes narrowed, but he turned away, ignoring the implied insult. He knew that Harry had been drinking more than was good for him, and was willing to excuse him for his words. Bud was only a few feet away from Harry, with no one between them. "You're drunk, Harry," said Clayton, shoving back from the table.
"Better go out and get some fresh air."
Hoban and Omaha carefully placed their billiard cues on the table and moved slowly toward the bar.
Harry looked at them and laughed.
"I don't need any help," he assured them, waving them away with a slight gesture of his left hand. "I can take care of myself, why betcha. Maybe it's none of my business, but when the sheriff comes in and tries to put himself in right with a jailbird of a horse thief, I'm edify." His right hand jerked to his gun and he swayed from the bar, but his defense was too slow. Before he had finished speaking, Bud Bell had flung himself forward, and Harry Allenby went down from a smash full in the face that flattened his nose and loosened his front teeth. He fell at the feet of Omaha and Hoban, who made no move to assist him, as they were looking at Sticky Clay, who had stepped into the center of the room, 6-shooter swinging at his thigh, a grin on his lips. Harry got slowly to his feet, spitting gore, but the fight had all been taken out of him. His gun was still in its holster, but he had enough for one day. "You can put up your gun, Clay," said Hoban. "The kid's been drinking too much, that's all."
Sticky Clay grinned and snapped the gun back into the holster.
Bud Bell's face was still white with anger, but he turned his back on the blubbering young cowboy, who was being led back to a bucket of water by Omaha Olson.
Clayton looked up at Swan River and said, "Overlook that, will you, Sheriff?"
"Harry is just a fool kid, and he had too much liquor." "I'll do the best I can," said Swan River seriously. "I hope this will be a lesson to him." Somebody'll kill him for talking too much one of these days, Clayton. I suppose they will, agreed Clayton, and resumed playing. Bud and Sticky left the place and crossed to a general merchandise store.
In a few minutes Swan River, Hashkniff and Sleepy went outside, where they met $40.
He wailed mightily when Swan River told him what had happened. "Just my darned luck," he exclaimed.
"Seems like I'm always eatin' when anything good is pulled off. If I ever want to see anything of the world, I'll have to starve, I reckon. Bet you $40 this won't be the end of it."
"I hope you lose that $40 sometime," grunted the sheriff.
"You've been off airin' that bet ever since I've knowed ya. Nobody ever takes me up, Swan River. I'm game."
"Oh, you never had that much money."
"I reckon I better go up to the depot and collect a lot of telegrams from the express company.
They'll swamp me with them for a while, even if there wasn't a 2-bit piece in that safe."
"How much did they lose?" asked Hashkniff. "I dunno. They probably don't know yet."
"Anyway, there ain't a ghost of a chance to." Swan River hesitated, cleared his throat harshly and headed for the depot. "I'd say that he was a square shooter," observed Hashkniff.
"Swan River?" $40 grinned softly. "Yeah, he's all right. He'd play square with a horse thief. That's why our jail ain't hardly ever occupied. But don't ya ever get the idea that the little feller ain't a fighter."
"I wouldn't choose him," smiled Hashkniff. They sauntered across the street and met Bud, who was coming out of the store, followed by Sticky Clay. "Hiya, Bud," greeted $40, holding out his hand. "Old $40 Dion, how are ya?" said Bud softly.
"Long time I no see ya."
They studied each other for several moments.
"You look all right, Bud," said Dion. "Yeah, I'm all right, 40. It seems good to see ya again." "Thank ya, Bud."
"Say, I want you fellers to meet Hashkniff Hartley and Sleepy Stevens. Gents, this is Bud Bell and Sticky Clay." The 4 men shook hands. Bud Bell's eyes never turned from his study of Hashkniff, even when he shook hands with Sleepy.
It was evident to both Hashkniff and Sleepy that Bud Bell had recognized them by name.
Sticky's eyes squinted reflectively, as he seemed to try and place them.
Hashkniff and Sleepy had never traveled incognito, even when knowingly going into an enemy country. Mulak was a long ways from any place where they had operated, and it was not surprising that more men did not recognize them by name.
There came an awkward pause, broken by Sticky Clay. "We better be getting back to the ranch with this stuff, Bud."
"All right," said Bud. "Pleased to have met ya, gents."
They walked across to their horses and rode out of town, while Hashkniff, Sleepy and $40 sauntered down to the office. "Did you ever know that tall puncher?" asked Clay, as he and Bud rode out of town.
"Seems like I've heard that name."
"I don't know him," said Bud slowly, thoughtfully, "but I've heard about him, Sticky. There was a man in the penitentiary, serving time for murder, who told me about him. This convict was part of the Moon River gang."
"Hartley sent him to the pen. Was he the only one of the gang in the pen?" asked Sticky. "Yeah, the rest died with their boots on." "Oh, yeah," muttered Sticky. "What do you reckon he's doing around here, Bud?"
Bud shook his head slowly.
"I dunno. Meb Allenby has hired him." "Well, Meb," said Sticky dubiously. "Ya never can tell."
"Still, when you knocked Harry Allenby down, and Hoban and Omaha were comin' from the pool table, I seen this tall puncher's hand swing back toward his gun, and he kinda humped a little.
I seen all this out of the corner of my eye."
"Meb he's hired by Allenby, but I'm wonderin' what would've happened if Allenby's gang had started anything." Bud shook his head and examined his skinned knuckles, which had come in contact with Harry Allenby's teeth. "I heard," said Sticky Clay, "that Clayton, the cattle buyer, is going to marry June Allenby." Bud looked up quickly, but Sticky was looking straight ahead, his sombrero pulled low over his eyes. For several moments they rode silently.
Bud's thin lips twisted painfully, as he said,
"Well, she'd sure make him a good wife." "That side of it is all right," observed Sticky.
"She'd make any man a good wife."
"If he was lucky enough to get her," said Bud softly. Sticky squinted sidewise under the protection of his white-hatted Bud, who was gazing unblinkingly at the bobbing ears of his horse. Frank Allenby fairly boiled with indignation when Chet Hoban told him what had happened in the Elk Saloon. Harry had refused to come home with Hoban in Omaha. Hoban told Allenby exactly what had transpired, without excusing Harry in any way. Allenby did not stop to consider that Harry had been a foolish young man. He only saw the disgrace to the Allenby family in having an ex-convict knock his son down in a saloon brawl. "Why didn't you and Omaha defend him?" he demanded hotly. Hoban shook his head slowly. Harry was wrong, and Sticky Clay had every man in the room covered before Harry went down. "And Clay will shoot." "Well, perhaps, grudgingly." "And Harry wouldn't come home, eh?" "No. He must feel the disgrace keenly." Allenby turned away and went into the house. Hoban squinted after him and went back toward the bunkhouse, where Omaha was stretched out on a bunk, reading a paperback novel. "How'd he take it?" asked Omaha. "Rearin' straight up," said Hoban humorously. "I told him that Harry wouldn't come home, and he said that Harry must feel the disgrace keenly." "My," grunted Omaha. "The disgrace keenly, eh? Did ya tell him everything that Harry said?" "Every word, cowboy. He ought to be proud of his offspring." "That's the of it, Omaha, he is." June Allenby was in the living room of the ranch house when her father came in after his talk with Chet Hoban, and she could see that he was greatly perturbed. June was a tall, slender girl, with an unruly crown of soft brown hair above a face that the cowboys of the Moolock swore, "Has anything beat that ever came over the hills?" But June was not of the clinging vine type, nor was she ever guilty of parading her own beauty. Allenby flung himself down in an easy chair that creaked to protest, and stared moodily at the well-worn Navajo rug under his feet. "What has gone wrong now, Dad?" asked June, closing the book she had been reading. He lifted his head and stared at her. "Wrong? Everything is wrong. Bud Bell whipped your brother in the Elk Saloon today. Knocked him down like a dog." Allenby grasped the arms of the chair, as though trying to tear them from their moorings. June colored slightly and looked away. "Why did he do it?" she asked calmly. "Why?" snorted her father. "Possibly Bud Bell thought it would help to pay me back for sending him to prison." "Don't you know what started it? What difference does that make? Had Harry been drinking?" "Drinking? He doesn't." "Yes, he does, Dad. Omaha told me." "Oh, pshaw. They all drink a little. Harry isn't a drinker. Perhaps it doesn't take much liquor to make him drunk." Allenby stared at June for several seconds. He chuckled angrily and got to his feet. "June, are you trying to defend Bud Bell?" "No, You met him at several dances before." June sprang to her feet and they looked squarely at each other. Then Allenby laughed harshly, and June whirled on her heel and left the room. "Bye, that would make them laugh," he told the empty room. "That rustler." He turned to the front door as a vehicle rattled over the hard ground outside, and he stepped out to see Clayton and a stranger getting out of a buggy. The stranger was of medium size, dark-featured, and with a small, black mustache. He was dressed in dark clothes, soft shirt, and a stiff-brimmed Stetson hat. "Mr. Allenby, meet Mr. Seeley, Jim Seeley." They shook hands jerkily. Clayton took a big suitcase from the buggy and placed it on the porch. "Kind of a pretty place you got here, Mr. Allenby," said Seeley, glancing around. "I never seen a cow ranch with so much paint before." "You believe in doodin' it up, don't ya?" "Just because it is a cattle ranch, there is no need of living like savages," replied Allenby. "Mr. Allenby is several jumps ahead of the rest of the country," declared Clayton. "He's progressive. His ranch house is as fine as a home in the city, and I'll defy you to find a broken board, loose post, or a loose wire on the place." Seeley laughed. "I'm not going to look." "Well, you couldn't find it," declared Allenby proudly. "I've seen to it all myself." "Do you intend to stay right here?" "Why not?" asked Seeley. "I'm working for you now." "Well, I'm glad to have you," said Allenby. "And when I hire a man, I want him where I can see that he is on the job all the time. Come on in and meet the family." Seeley shot a side glance at Clayton, who was trying to suppress a smile, and they followed Allenby into the house.
Now who do you reckon that is? Queried Omaha,
who was looking out of the window and saw the three men going into the house. Hoban joined him and took a look at the stranger. That must be the private investigator that Clayton sent for, said Hoban dryly. Allenby has had the detective idea for quite a while, it seems. He lost faith in the Cattle Association, and had some words with the secretary, who promised to get him a first-class cow detective, but it seems that Allenby didn't ante high enough to get this man. He wouldn't, agreed Omaha, turning away from the window. I don't like to appear disloyal, but personally I think that Allenby is so stingy that he takes out his false teeth at night to save the wear and tear from his snores. Omaha went back to his paper-backed novel, while Chet Hoban sat down to play a game of solitaire. About 15 minutes later Harry Allenby came in. His nose was badly swollen, as was his upper lip, but he was well loaded with liquor, and if he had been disgraced he did not show it. "Who's up at TH House?" he asked thickly, trying to point in the direction of the ranch house.
"Clayton and a stranger," grunted Hoban. "Who's a stranger?" "I dunno." Hoban was trying to concentrate on the layout. "Zasso?"
Harry sat down on the bunk and looked owlishly at Omaha, who grinned behind his book. "He's a detective, Sonny," said Omaha patiently. "He's come here to save your papa's lil cowlets."
"Zasso?" Harry blinked thoughtfully. "Z a goo one?" "Sure is," nodded Omaha.
"He's the jigger that found the lost cord, if you know what that is."
"Yezzer, I dunno." "A well man up at the house?"
"Yeah, he's there." "If I was you I'd doctor up that nose and lip, Harry."
"Yoria of a lookin' thing, if you ask me."
"You better crawl into bed and sleep it off," said Hoban, without looking up.
"Don't let your dad see you drunk." "Zasso?"
Harry stumbled over to a mirror and looked at himself with one eye shut. "I'm a sweet-lookin' lily, there's a cinch," he concluded. He came back to the center of the room, as though the sight of himself had sobered him a little.
"I'm going back to town," he decided.
"You better stay right here," advised Hoban.
"Shuck off your clothes and go to bed." "Not if I can get away without the folks seeing me."
He opened the door cautiously, peered out for several moments before going out after his horse.
Omaha went to the window and watched Harry make his sneak back toward town.
"Dongate fool kid," opined Hoban.
"Yeah," nodded Omaha, "he's a fool all right, I suppose.
Still he's old enough to know what he wants."
"I blame Allenby more than I do the kid. He won't even pay Harry a cowpuncher's wages."
Someone was talking just outside the door, so Omaha went to the window and looked out at Swan River Smith and $40 Dion, who had just ridden up to the bunkhouse. "The law has found us out, Chet," he said as he threw the door open.
"Howdy, officers," he called. "Get down and appear amiable." "Hello, Omaha," grinned Swan River. "Is Allenby at home? I mean Mr. Allenby."
Omaha grinned widely and pointed toward the house, where Allenby, Clayton and Seeley had come out on the porch. Clayton got into the buggy and drove away, and after a few moments of conversation Allenby and Seeley came down to the bunkhouse. Allenby did not introduce Seeley to any of them, but spoke directly to the sheriff.
"Something you wanted, Mr. Smith?"
"Nothin' I exactly wanted, Mr. Allenby," said the sheriff.
"It was kinda in regard to your loss of last night. In reply I can say that I ain't been able to find any clue yet. In your talk of this morning you kinda intimated that you suspected somebody of purloining your cows, and if you ain't got nothin' else to do right now, I'd kinda like to have you explain your suspicions to me. Sincerely yours, Swan River Smith, Sheriff of Moolock."
Swan River had intoned the whole statement, as though dictating a letter, and Allenby's ears reddened quickly. Omaha smothered a grin, but $40 Dion laughed outright. Allenby glared angrily at $40, but that worthy did not mind.
"Are you trying to be smart, or just funny?" Allenby asked the sheriff.
"It's all in the point of view," said Swan River evenly.
"All right," Allenby spat viciously. "As far as my losses are concerned, you may just forget them."
"I am not asking any assistance from the sheriff's office, and I don't care to have you volunteer any."
"I hope you understand what I mean."
"You didn't leave many loopholes for a mistake to crawl through," grinned Swan River.
"But your likes and dislikes don't mean nothing to me, Allenby."
I'm the sheriff of this county, and I want to tell you.
Pardon me, but you can't tell me anything. Thus Allenby.
That's the whole trouble with you, said Swan River slowly. You think that you're a tin god around here, Allenby. Another thing you might do without any advice from me, and that is to look after that half-baked kid of yours. He came dongade near gettin' what was comin' to him today, when he opened his mouth too wide.
You've brought him up to think too much of the name of Allenby. Now I'm tellin' this to you for your own good.
And you might preach it to him and practice a little of it yourself. When you've got some evidence that'll hold good in court, let me look at it.
In the meantime, think what you please, but keep your mouth shut. I hate to conduct coroner's inquests. Adios.
The two officers turned their horses and rode away, leaving Allenby gasping with wrath. Omaha stepped back into the bunkhouse, where he could laugh in safety, while Allenby spluttered and told the wide world what he thought of Swan River Smith. Finally he introduced Seeley to Chet Hoban, but did not tell Hoban what Seeley's business was.
In fact, Allenby was too mad to tell anything.
We're going to town, Chet, he said hoarsely. I'll hitch up the team myself. He and Seeley went toward the stable, and Hoban leaned against the doorway until they drove away. Omaha, his face tear-streaked, came out to watch them depart.
Probably going down to tell his son that the fatted calf is almost ready for the barbecue, said Omaha hoarsely.
More likely going down to save his little lamb from the slaughter, said Hoban. Me and you better fix a new lock on this bunkhouse, Omaha. The next thing we know, somebody will steal us.
For the next 2 days Moolock was devoid of excitement. Hashkniff and Sleepy spent their time loafing around the Elk Saloon and the sheriff's office.
They had made the acquaintance of several cowboys, but had not tried to secure work.
Hashkniff suggested that they move on, but Sleepy demurred.
Something tells me that Moolock is a good place for to be, Hashkniff, he stated. The poker games ain't too avaricious, they put up good food, and I ain't found a bug in that hotel.
You don't find many places as good as this, cowboy.
Swan River and $40 had scoured the country, trying to see what they could see, but there was no trace of Allenby's 300 Herefords. The express company had flooded Swan River with correspondence regarding the robbery, but as yet they had offered no reward. I marked them off my slate, as soon as they got into the beer paws, stated Swan River.
I'd like to see you fellers get your broncs back.
Me, too, said Sleepy. They was the best pair of animals that ever wore a saddle, why betcha.
Whoa, but that roan of mine was a bird.
I'll betcha, nodded Swan River.
It could run a mile in spite of.
Just about that fast, agreed Sleepy.
It was one of them famous Arab steeds, noted for endurance.
It was the horse that the old emperor or something or other meant when he yelled that he'd trade his kingdom for a horse. Yes sir, I'm sure pinning a lot for that hammer-headed, ring-boned hunk of coyote bait.
Speaking of horses, observed Hashkniff, I'd like to play somebody a game of bottle pool for the championship of Sweden.
I'll poke ya a game, offered $40 quickly. Swan River and Sleepy agreed to hold stakes and keep the score, but before the quartet reached the Elk Saloon, Jack Merton, owner of the Arrowhead outfit, and Pete Sepulveda, one of his cowboys, came riding down the street, leading 2 horses.
Hashkniff and Sleepy looked quickly at each other, as they recognized their horses.
There was no mistaking Hashkniff's tall bay and Sleepy's hammer-headed roan. Merton waved to the sheriff, and he and Sepulveda tied the 4 horses to the Elk Saloon hitch rack, and the 4 men waited for the 2 riders. Seen anybody that lost 2 horses? Asked Merton, a tall well-built cowboy, with a pleasant cast of countenance, indicating the horses.
These 2 were camped at my stable this morning, so I brought 'em in, Sheriff. One's branded with a JK and the other with a triangle 6. They don't show in my register book.
They belong to us, grinned Hashkniff.
Fr gosh sake, exclaimed Swan River. Is them the 2 saddle racks you've been wailin' about?
Well.
Ha! What about it? Asked Merton interestedly.
Well, Swan River scratched his head thoughtfully, it ain't ready for explanation, Jack. You just take my word for it that the horses belongs to these gents, will ya? Anything you say, Swan River, Merton grinned and hitched up his chaps. That's fine of ya, admitted Swan River, and proceeded to introduce Merton and Sepulveda to Hashkniff and Sleepy. They all adjourned into the saloon, and a few minutes later another writer came into town. It was not difficult to see that this writer's veins carried a certain percentage of Indian blood. He was nearly 6 feet tall, a trifle gaudy in his spotted calfskin vest and scarlet muffler, together with a canary yellow shirt. He was about 45 years of age, with a deeply lined face and prominent cheekbones. He looked over the horses at the rack, especially the two strange ones, before dismounting. Seemingly satisfied with his inspection, he tied his sorrel horse at the rack, adjusted his belt and went into the saloon.
"Well, here's Sam Bass comin' to town," exclaimed Swan River, as the newcomer approached the bar.
"How are ya, Sam?"
"Pretty good, you bet," laughed Bass.
"Hello, $40.
"Hello, Merton. How are you?"
"By golly, here's Pete Sepulveda."
"Have a drink," invited Swan River.
"Sure, I drink whiskey."
"Pretty dry these days."
They poured out their drinks and Swan River introduced Hashkniff and Sleepy to Sam Bass, who grunted and grinned widely.
"I see two strange horses at the rack," he stated. "I don't know the brands, so I suppose strangers here." "You ride bareback, eh?" "Well, here's regards," said Hashkniff, ignoring Bass' question. He knew that Swan River did not want to explain about the lost horses. Bass noticed the evasion, and elevated his brows slightly, but drank his liquor and did not bring up the subject again. "You don't happen to know of somebody that wants to hire a couple of good punchers, do ya?" Thus Hashkniff, speaking to Merton. Merton shook his head and motioned to the bartender to get busy again. "No, I don't," he said. "I've got a full crew. Maybe Sam needs some help." "Not much," replied Bass quickly. "I got too much help now. Pinion Meat and Lem Elder set in the shade all the time." "Must take a lot of shade for all three of you," observed Swan River. Sam Bass laughed loudly, nodding excitedly. "By golly, that's right," he exploded. "I'm lazy too. Swan River knows. Some cattlemen work all the time. Look at Allenby. He make new fence, paint it pretty, paint the house. He's rich. Sam Bass let ranch go to, he's poor. Allenby work all the time, worry, too, I guess. He's fool. Sam Bass never work much, never worry no time. He's fool, too. Let's have another drink, eh? Drink to two fools." "Allenby wouldn't appreciate that," laughed Merton. "He sure thinks he's a wise man. Personally, I think that Sam Bass is right." "Dongate right he is," agreed $40. "Any old time a man says that Allenby is a fool, I'll agree with him." "What about Allenby losing 300 head of Herefords?" asked Merton. "Was it a fact?" "You ask Allenby," laughed $40. "It gave him plumbago." "Plumbago is lead," stated Swan River. "You don't mean plumbago, you mean lumbago, 40. "Faso?" $40 emptied his glass and wiped off his chin. "If I shoot a man, I give him plumbago, do I? If you shot him with a lead pencil, 40. "My," grunted $40. "That liquor sure does take a holt of you, Swan River." "Shoot him with a lead pencil." $40 stared around at the rest of the men, his eyes wide with wonder. "You fellers better exchange a few last words with Swan River Smith, while he still has a little sabe left," he said softly. "It sure is the turning point in his glorious career. I'd rather see him dead than to not know anything. Knows he's always been bad enough, but this is too much." $40 Dion buried his face in his elbows on the bar and began crying. "That Dongay fool always gets a cryin' jag on, after about 6 drinks," said Swan River disgustedly. "Let him cry." Someone passed a sack of tobacco and they were rolling cigarettes, when a tow-headed youngster, his eyes wide with wonder, tiptoed into the saloon and looked at the group at the bar. "What do you want, Sonny?" asked the bartender. I want the sheriff," faltered the youngster. "Me?" asked Swan River. "What do you want, son?" You better come out here." The lad turned and fairly ran out of the place. "Meb I better," agreed Swan River quickly, and he was followed by everyone, except $40 and the bartender. The boy was on the sidewalk, pointing excitedly toward the hitch rack,
where a man sat drunkenly on a horse, reins dragging. "That looks dongate funny," exclaimed the sheriff, as they all hurried out to the man. He was roped to the saddle with a long lariat, and tied to the rope, where it circled the man's neck, was a fairly fresh cowhide. It was Seeley, Allenby's detective. His face was gray as ashes, except where it was caked with blood, and there was blood all over his shirt. It appeared that the man had been shot in the head and in the body. Hashkniff took out his knife and cut the ropes, while the others lowered the man to the sidewalk. He groaned painfully and collapsed. Swan River sent one of the men after a doctor. Hashkniff spread out the cowhide. It had been taken from a Hereford 2-year-old, and the brand on the right shoulder was a half-circle cross.
"Does anybody know him?" asked Swan River. "Ain't he the feller who was stayin' at Allenby's place?"
"He was here with Allenby yesterday," offered the bartender, who had left $40 alone. "It kinda looks like he'd collected the hide of one of Allenby's missin' Herefords," said Hashkniff. "He's got creased along the head, and it kinda looks like there might be a bullet in his right shoulder, which made him lose quite some gore." The youngster came racing back with the information that the doctor wanted them to bring the man down to his home. Someone got a blanket from the hotel, and there were plenty of men to carry the wounded man down to the doctor's office. Swan River carried the cowhide over in front of his office and draped it across the little hitch rack. "What do you make of it, Hartley?" he asked seriously. "Why would anybody shoot this man, tie him to a saddle and send him back with that cowhide?" "You want my opinion, Swan River?" "I betcha." "Well, I ain't got one. It kinda looks to me like somebody was tryin' to take a slap at Mr. Allenby." Swan River sighed deeply. All this was only piling up misery for him. "I suppose I've got to make an arrest pretty soon," he said slowly. "I ain't got a bit of evidence to make it on, but the arrow points just one way. Still, I dunno." He got up and walked to the door of the office. Hank and Bud Bell were dismounting at the general store. "There's old Hank Bell," he told Hashkniff, pointing at the angular little man, who carried his right arm sharply bent at the elbow. They disappeared into the store, and Swan River turned to Hashkniff. "That pinto and gray belong to old Hank," he said softly. "Bud rides the pinto." "You still got 'em in your stable?" asked Hashkniff. "Sure thing. When they start inquiring about lost horses, it'll be time enough for me to do my talkin'. Nobody, except the 4 of us, know about 'em." Hashkniff walked up to the store and went inside. He was curious to see old Hank Bell. Bud was buying some cartridges from the proprietor, who was telling him about the stranger who had been shot. Old Hank seemed indifferent to the telling, but Hashkniff could see that the old man was not missing a word of it. Old Hank was of the old school of cattlemen. He was small, wiry of frame, thin-faced, his white hair reaching to his collar. His eyes were small and as hard as agate, but there were enough grin wrinkles around them to prove that old Hank Bell was not always serious. His right arm was crippled in such a way that he was unable to reach below his waist, and Hashkniff noticed that the old man wore his holster on the left side, tied down. Regular old he-wolf, Hashkniff told himself. Taught himself to draw and shoot left-handed. The proprietor finished telling his story, and a ghost of a smile flitted across old Hank's lips, when the proprietor spoke about the half-circle cross cowhide that was hanging from the man's neck. Bud turned and nodded to Hashkniff. He spoke aside to his father, who shot a quick glance at Hashkniff. Pete Sepulveda came into the store and spoke to Hashkniff. "That feller was shot twice, Hartley. The one creased his head and won't amount to much, but the other one went plumb through him. He was shot from behind. The doctor dunno whether it'll kill him or not. Do you know who he is?" "Nope. Somebody said he was stayin' at Allenby's place. Allenby just drove in. I seen him comin' as I came in here." Hashkniff walked to the door and looked up the street. Allenby and his daughter were in the buckboard, stopped in the middle of the street, talking to one of the men who had just come from the doctor's office. As Hashkniff watched them, Allenby whipped up his team and went toward the doctor's place. Bud completed his purchases and walked across to the Elk Saloon, followed by his father, who gave Hashkniff a searching glance as he went past. "He's a tough old pelican," declared Sepulveda. "Don't think he's been in a shootin' scrape since he got his arm smashed, but I'm bettin' that he sabes how to shoot left-handed." Them old jiggers shoot first and talk afterward.
Old Hank used to be awful fast with a gun.
He had a funny way of getting his gun, partly. He'd kinda swing his hand behind the holster like a feller might swing his hand when he's walkin', and on the back swing he pulled and shot all to once.
I dunno how he done it. I've tried to do it.
They tell me that he learned Bud how to do it, but I ain't never seen Bud have to shoot yet. They walked outside and joined Sleepy and Merton. "Allenby is throwing a fit," declared Sleepy.
He acts like he was the one that got shot.
I asked him who this feller was, and he told me it was none of my business, which it wasn't. I've heard a lot of profanity, but Allenby's got 'em all skinned. "Not in front of his daughter, did he?" asked Hashkniff. "No, she didn't stay, she drove back to the post office." Swan River Smith and Sam Bass were coming down the street toward the store, but crossed the street and went to the White Horse Saloon. "I'll buy a drink," offered Sepulveda, and Sleepy accepted, but Hashkniff shook his head.
"Thank you just the same, Sepulveda. Mab, I'll join you later."
Sleepy and Sepulveda went to the saloon, leaving Hashkniff leaning against the front of the store, cogitating over certain things.
Bud Bell came out of the saloon as Sleepy and Sepulveda went in.
He declined their invitation to drink and came over to the store. "How is everything today, Hartley?" he asked, as he went past. "Oh, kinda interestin'," smiled Hashkniff.
June Allenby was coming down the street, carrying some packages in her hands.
It was the first time that Hashkniff had seen her, and he was forced to agree with $40 Dion that June Allenby was a dinger. It was not like Hashkniff to stare at a lady, but he did. In fact, he was so interested in her that he did not hear Bud Bell come out of the store. June lifted her eyes from the sidewalk and looked straight past Hashkniff, who turned his head and discovered Bud Bell. They had both stopped and were staring at each other. Hashkniff wished that he was on the opposite side of the street instead of almost directly between these two. Then Bud stepped to the edge of the sidewalk, as though to start across the street, but the girl halted him with a motion of her hand.
"Bud," she said, "aren't you going to even say hello?"
Bud's hand went uncertainly to his sombrero, but his eyes shifted from June and glanced quickly around.
"Yes'm, I reckon that wouldn't hurt anybody, and I don't want to hurt you."
He stepped off the sidewalk and headed swiftly across the street. Hashkniff watched June's face as she followed him with her eyes until he went into the Elk Saloon. Hashkniff wanted to speak to her, to tell her that he would help to straighten things out, but he was tongue-tied. Perhaps she read his intentions in his eyes as she passed him and went into the store. "She loves Bud Bell," he told himself wonderingly.
"Can you beat that?
This is sure a queer old world. And in spite of all the trouble Frank Allenby has caused Bud Bell, I'm bettin' that Bud Bell loves Allenby's daughter.
He said he didn't want to hurt her. I wonder if he meant, oh, well, let's see."
He hooked his thumb over the waistband of his overalls and considered the situation for a space of time. His eyes shifted to their two horses at the Elk Saloon hitch rack. "By golly, I've got to fix a place for them broncs," he told himself, "and this is as good a time as any, I reckon." He turned on his heel and went slowly down the street. Hashkniff was barely out of sight when Allenby came from the doctor's home. His face was black with anger and his hands were clenched at his sides as he strode along. Near the door of the Elk Saloon he stopped and studied the horses at the hitch racks. Over in front of the store stood the two horses which Hank Bell and his son had ridden.
"Both here," muttered Allenby, half aloud. "Bye, I've stood enough."
He turned, spat viciously, grimacing, as though he tasted wormwood in gall, and went into the saloon. Swan River Smith and Pete Sepulveda saw him cross in front of the White Horse Saloon, and they lost no time in crowding into the saloon behind him. He was standing in the middle of the room, looking at Hank Bell, who was standing at the bar with Sleepy and Sam Bass. He did not notice that the sheriff was behind him. Bud was sitting beside a card table, looking at an old newspaper, but now his eyes shifted to Allenby. "I've stood about all I'm going to, Bell," Allenby spoke to old Hank in a shaking voice. Hank Bell turned slowly, his left hand swinging back of him, as though to shove him away from the bar. "Look out," whispered Pete Sepulveda, who knew what that movement meant.
Allenby was not a gunman.
It is doubtful if he could have hit Hank Bell at that distance, but his anger had made him forget all caution. He wanted to crush this little, crooked-armed old man. But Hank Bell was not going to fight him. He stood there, poised easily, his left hand splayed out behind him. But before anything more could be said, Swan River Smith butted Allenby with his left shoulder, while with his right hand he snatched Allenby's gun from its holster. The jolt turned the big man half around and he struck at the little sheriff, but Swan River easily dodged the blow and stepped between Allenby and Hank Bell. "And that'll be about all of this show," said Swan River calmly. "If you fellers want to go gunning for each other, you better go out on the flat somewhere." "I wasn't gunning for anybody," said old Hank slowly, "but I hate to disappoint anybody when they ask me for trouble." "That's all right, Hank." Swan River turned to Allenby. "Someday, Allenby, you'll make a mistake. And it'll probably be the kind of a mistake that a man only makes once in a lifetime. I don't blame you for being mad, but you ought to use judgment." "What was this to you?" demanded Allenby hotly. "You had no right to interfere with my business. Give me back that gun." Swan River grinned and shoved the gun inside the waistband of his overalls. "When you get ready to go home, I'll just do that," he said. "I'm kinda responsible for the wear and tear on Moolock, you know." "You're responsible for a lot of things," sneered Allenby. "I came to town to get a little information from you, Smith. This morning I had a little talk with a man named Pearson. He's from Tacoma. He told me a little story about you being at Tacoma the other night, the evening of the day that the express robbery was pulled off. He told me about two men whose horses were stolen by the bandits, and he told me about a pinto and a gray that were left at the hitch rack. The pinto had a coal black head. Pearson saw the brands, too. What about it?" Swan River squinted at Sleepy and his brows drew into a deep frown. He realized that there was nothing more he could do to keep that evidence under cover. Hank Bell and Bud were looking straight at each other, and now Bud got to his feet. "Take it easy," advised Sleepy softly. Bud flashed a glance at him, as though wondering why Sleepy had said that. "Well, what about it?" asked Allenby triumphantly. He felt that he was putting the screws to Swan River Smith, and he knew that it was not welcome news to the Bell family. "What about it?" queried Swan River vacantly. "Ha! Pearson told you this, did he?" "Yes, he did." "Would he have any reason to lie?" "No, I don't reckon he would, Allenby." "What about the pinto and gray?" asked Bell wonderingly. Swan River pursed his lips as he shook his head slowly. "You've got those horses," declared Allenby. "You've had them ever since that night." Swan River did not deny it. Sepulveda turned to Sleepy. "That's how you lost your two horses, eh?" Sleepy ignored the question. "Are they in your stable or at the livery barn?" asked Allenby. "You might find out by lookin'," said Swan River. "All right," snapped Allenby. "You know as well as I do that those two horses belong to Hank Bell. Now what are you going to do about it?" "Do about it?" parroted Swan River. "Yes. Are you going to let them escape while we go to look at the evidence?" Swan River squinted at Hank and Bud. "Are ya?" he asked. Old Hank shook his head and said, "I'd rather fight than run, Swan River." "Suppose we go with ya?" "That's of a way to run your office," exploded Allenby. "Some of these days." "Suppose you stay here, Allenby," suggested Swan River blandly. "No, bye. All I want is a square deal. Will we go to the livery barn first?" "Suit yourself." They all trooped to the livery stable, where it did not take them long to find that the horses were not there. Back they went to the sheriff's stable, behind his office, where they found Hashkniff, busily currying the tall bay. In the next stall stood the J.K. roan, belonging to Sleepy, and in the other two stalls stood Swan River's sorrel and $40 buckskin. Hashkniff looked curiously at the crowd, but did not cease grooming his horse. Swan River leaned against the doorway and rubbed his chin, while the rest of the crowd looked around blankly and came outside. I hope you're satisfied," said Swan River chokingly. "Satisfied?" snorted Allenby. He was no longer the triumphant person of a few minutes ago. Old Hank scratched his head foolishly and motioned to Bud. "You don't want us for anything more, do ya?" Old Hank spoke to Swan River. "Shucks, no," said Swan River. "I reckon everybody's satisfied." "I hope so," said Old Hank.
Come on, bud.
They walked back through the alley, leaving Allenby staring after them, his lips working painfully. He turned on the sheriff. "What crooked work is this?" he demanded hotly. "You just the same as admitted that you had those horses." "I didn't admit nothing," denied Swan River. "I was willin' to prove that I didn't." Allenby went back toward the street without another word. "I'd buy a drink," stated Pete Sepulveda. "I'd buy a drink for everybody." Sam Bass, Merton and several more of the crowd accepted on the spot, but Sleepy had already gone to work grooming his roan. Swan River sat down on the feed box and watched the two cowboys work on their horses, until the rest of the men had gone back. "I thought they had ya, Swan River," said Sleepy, pausing to clean his currycomb. "Ya coulda knocked me down with a straw." "Yeah, I felt the same about it." Swan River squinted at Hashkniff questioningly, but the tall cowboy's face was serious. For several minutes there was nothing but the swish of the currycomb and brush to break the silence. Finally Hashkniff stepped back, looked the bay over carefully and threw the comb and brush into a box against the wall. He walked to the door and looked out, as he brushed off his shirt. "Hartley," said Swan River softly. "Did you know that Pearson had talked with Allenby?" "Pearson?" "Yeah. He's the feller who runs the saloon at Tacoma." "Did ya know that Pearson told Allenby about those two horses, the Pinto and the Gray?" "No, I didn't know it. We needed a place to put our broncs, and I didn't feel like paying a livery stable to keep M." Swan River took a deep breath and looked at Sleepy, who had ceased work while Hashkniff was talking. "And that's about all you'll ever get out of him," said Sleepy knowingly. "Well," Swan River sighed with satisfaction, "that's enough to suit me. Mab we're all wrong, I dunno. Anyway, I thank ya, Hashkniff. It saved me from a lot of explainin' that." "You're welcome, Sheriff," said Hashkniff. He was thinking of a girl who wanted a boy to say hello to her, a boy who was afraid that even a hello from him might harm her. "This is of a world," he said thoughtfully. "It sure is," agreed Swan River. "We don't ask to get in, get while we're here, and get out because we can't help ourselves. My old dad used to say, eat a lot of green vegetables, keep your mouth shut and your gun cocked, and you'll live a long time." Sleepy laughed and put up his brush. "How close do you follow that advice?" he asked. "Well," grinned Swan River, "I keep my gun cocked quite a lot of the time. I figure that's what they call a necessary of life anyway around here." A lapse of 24 hours had made little difference in Allenby's feelings toward the rest of the world. Seeley was still alive, but the doctor held out little hope for his recovery. The soft-nosed bullet had just about wrecked one of his lungs, and the other had caused a slight concussion of the brain. Clayton has just brought in the latest report of Seeley's condition, and Allenby had called a meeting at the bunkhouse. Harry was sober but just a bit shaky, Omaha amused, Hoban serious. It was then that Allenby told them all about hiring Seeley to investigate for him. "They shot him down like a dog," Allenby told them angrily. "They have probably added murder to their other crimes. There is no doubt in my mind that either the sheriff, his deputy, or one of those two strange cowboys turned that Pinto and Gray horse loose, to ruin the evidence. Just what interest those two cowboys have in this deal, I do not know. I feel sure that Swan River Smith thought those two horses were in the stable, and that he was as surprised as anyone else when we did not find them. The sheriff is against us, so it is up to us to handle it in the only way possible, go and settle it ourselves." "How do you mean?" asked Hoban. "I mean that we'll ride down to the HB ranch, force them to confess and take them to jail ourselves." "Christmas daisies," grunted Omaha. "You talk like we was going out to bring in a cow." Allenby glared at Omaha. He did not believe in anyone questioning an order or a suggestion from him. "Are you afraid to do this, Olson?" he asked. "No, I ain't afraid," said Omaha meaningly. "I just don't think it can be done, that's all. You might get a lot of hot lead, but you won't get no confession." "Would you refuse to go?" asked Allenby. Omaha squinted at the floor for several moments before he looked up at Allenby and nodded slowly. "Yeah, I reckon I would. If I caught a man stealing your cows, I'd shoot him as quick as you would, but I don't reckon I'm going to try and take the law in my own hands and try to make a man confess. That's up to the officers, not to me."
All right, said Allenby briskly.
Your wages up to date are ready for you, Olson. I want men who will do my bidding.
How about you, Hoban?
I'll ride with Omaha, said Hoban calmly.
We came here together, you know.
I've handled your cows, Allenby, you handle your own killin'.
Allenby snorted audibly and looked around.
He had been sure of Hoban, because Hoban was his foreman.
It left only 3 of them to do the job, and he wasn't so sure of Clayton. Well, that makes things different, he decided grudgingly.
Decidedly, agreed Clayton.
Perhaps the idea wasn't as good as it might have been.
You see, Allenby, you haven't enough evidence yet to force a confession from either of the Bell family.
Well, how can I get it? Demanded Allenby.
I'd give $5,000 for evidence enough to convict those 2 men. No one seemed to know, which was not surprising.
Who are those 2 cowboys? Asked Allenby. One is named Hartley and the other one Stevens, offered Harry. I heard that much about M. The tall one is nicknamed Hashkniff.
Allenby squinted closely at Harry. Are you sure of that, Harry? He asked.
Well, that's what they're called. That's funny, muttered Allenby, turning to Clayton.
That is the names of the 2 men that Freeman, the secretary of the Cattle Association, spoke to me about. They refused my offer, but still they came here.
Hartley and Stevens, eh? Said Clayton wonderingly. Who sent them in here, I wonder? I've done all the wondering I'm going to, declared Allenby, turning to the door. I'm going to town and find these 2 men. My offer is still open, and I think they'll accept it, after I tell them what it means to me. How soon can I get my pay? Asked Omaha. Allenby halted halfway outside and looked back. We will take that up later, Olson. Are you going with me, Clayton?
Yes, I'll go with you, agreed Clayton. They drove away in a cloud of dust, swinging out through the main gate on 2 wheels.
Omaha grinned and sat down on his bunk.
I suppose that me and you are canned, Chet, he said.
Yori canned, corrected Chet, I quit. Ah, blurted Harry.
The old man will forget all that in an hour.
You fellers got anything drinkable around here?
You lay off the booze, advised Hoban. The first thing you know the old man will cut you off his will.
Is that so?
Harry laughed sarcastically. That'll hurt me a lot. He never did give me a cent, and he'll live longer than I will probably. If you don't keep your mouth shut, agreed Hoban dryly.
Harry laughed and went up to the ranch house, while Omaha and Hoban began packing their war sacks.
It did not take Allenby and Clayton long to make the drive to Moolock, and they were greeted at Elk Saloon with the information that Seeley had died. The doctor wanted some information regarding this man, in order to notify his relatives, and Swan River Smith wanted some information regarding him, to use at the inquest. Allenby knew nothing about him, except what Clayton had told him, and Clayton's information was almost as vague. He knew that Seeley was a detective, a cattle detective, but he did not know where Seeley's relatives lived. Swan River Smith went back to his office, where $40 Hashkniff and Sleepy were playing 7-Up at 2 bits a corner, and told them what Clayton had told him regarding the dead man. Name is Seeley, and he was a cattle detective, eh? Mused Hashkniff.
It kinda looks to me like his profession reacted upon him.
Maybe he wore a star, or something that advertised his calendar.
That's why Allenby told me to keep out of it, grinned Swan River.
He sobered in a moment, shutting one eye, as he considered the situation. I'll tell ya, it ain't so much of a joke, at that, he said. Murder is murder, by golly. That Seeley was shot from behind, and it ain't no ways healthy nor conductive of pleasant thoughts to think that there might be a killer behind the next bush. Looks to me like it might be a warning, observed $40.
I sure believe in them kinda signs.
I've had my fortune told 5 times, altogether.
Had M told by a different person every time, and every fortune was different. Doggone it, you never know who to believe.
One of M told me to beware of a tall, dark man, another told me that I was going to have a lot of trouble with a light-complected man, and the rest of M dilated on trouble with 3 other kinds of men.
And they all was different.
If I tried to run my existence according to their warnings, I'd have to hide out in the hills.
Who?
I sure have got a lot of mixed sizes and colors trying to make life hard for me. I never had my fortune told, said Swan River. I'd a lot rather get along in my own dumb way. I don't want to know what is just around the next turn, but I'd sure like to have just a little inside information on who is doing this dirty work. We'll have to hold this inquest tomorrow and shove that poor under the sod without knowing anything more about him. Clayton, the cattle buyer, hired him for Allenby, but Clayton don't know where Seeley's relatives live. While they were talking, Dr. Edwall, the coroner, came in. He was a fussy little man, partly bald, and talked jerkily. Very little information to be had, he declared. Clayton knows very little. No known relatives. Came here from Omaha, Nebraska. Pockets yielded very little. Nothing worthwhile. Here, he handed the sheriff a soiled envelope that is a letter to Seeley, written, I presume, by Mr. Clayton. I have read it. Swan River Smith took the letter out of the envelope and read it carefully. Swan River did not read very fast. Finally, he placed it on his desk. Well, that don't give us much information, Doctor, he decided. We'll just have to go ahead and hold the inquest, bring in the usual verdict, and bury the corpse, I reckon. Yes, I suppose so, Sheriff. Well, goodbye, gentlemen. The doctor bustled away, as busy as a bee. Hashkniff picked up the letter and looked it over. It had been sent from Moolock and was directed to Jim Seeley, Omaha, Nebraska, care of General Delivery. The letter read, Dear Jim, Frank Allenby, the biggest cattleman in Moolock, is up against a very dangerous proposition and needs help. It looks like a plain case of spite work by somebody, and you can make $5,000 for a few days' work. This gang of rustlers are able to pull off big jobs and get away without the slightest chance of anyone detecting them. Your work must be done without anyone knowing who you are, sabe? I will explain everything to you when you get here. You will like Allenby. If you can't take this job, Jim, it will disappoint me greatly. If you come, keep it dark or it might make things very bad. Wire your decision. Sincerely, Ed. Well, Allenby's life is still worth the $5,000, I reckon, smiled Hashkniff, as he handed the letter back to the sheriff. Meb he'll raise the ante after a while. Speak about the, muttered $40. Allenby was entering the office as $40 spoke, but he could hardly have heard what Hashkniff said. Allenby was trying his best to be pleasant as he greeted all of them. He sat down and fanned himself with his hat. Going to hold the inquest tomorrow? He asked the sheriff. Yeah, tomorrow, nodded the sheriff. Probably want you to testify, Allenby. It won't amount to anything, but it's according to law. Certainly, agreed Allenby warmly. I wish I could give you more information regarding this man Seeley, but I knew nothing about him. There is no question but what he was murdered. Well, said Swan River slowly, I never knowed a man to shoot himself twice in the back with a rifle. I suppose there is some of them contortionists that might shoot themselves once in the back, but I'll betcha that a 30-30 would sure take the kink out of 'em real quick. No, I reckon we've got to look the facts square in the face and admit that Seeley was shot with malice aforethought and a high-powered rifle. Muttered Allenby. Swan River's face was so serious that Allenby wasn't quite sure whether Swan River was joking or not. He decided to drop the subject, so he turned to Hashkniff and said, I was just wondering if you two cowboys were looking for work. Hashkniff grinned widely. You might change that question to read, looking for jobs, and get us to nod our heads. Allenby forced a laugh. I suppose it's just as well to be honest about it, he said. There will probably be 2 vacancies on my ranch, and you two can have the jobs if you care to take them. Hoban and Omaha Quittin asked $40. Well, it amounts to that. I shall make Harry foreman, I think. He needs responsibility. He sure needs something, grinned Swan River. Allenby's lips formed a hot retort, but he curbed his feelings. He knew that there was nothing to gain in quarreling with the sheriff, so he shut his lips and waited for Hashkniff to decide. $40 a month? Asked Sleepy. Yes. The $40 per month did not appeal to Sleepy, but he was willing to leave the decision to Hashkniff, who was thinking deeply over the offer. Well, he said slowly, I suppose we might take it. It ain't none of my business, but but I'd like to know why your foreman and the other man are quitting ya." Allenby's expression indicated that it was none of Hashniff's business, but he replied evenly,
"They are leaving the half-circle cross because they would not obey orders." "Yeah? Well, maybe we won't obey him either, Allenby. But if you want to take that chance, we're willing, Sleepy?" "We can always quit," said Sleepy indifferently.
"Well, that is settled," said Allenby, with a certain amount of satisfaction, as he got up and started for the door.
"You will be out to the ranch today?"
"Before supper time," said Hashniff. A few minutes later Omaha and Hoban rode into town, with their warsack, containing their belongings, tied to the back of their saddles. Allenby met them on the street and paid what was due on their salaries. Clayton was not going back to the ranch, so Allenby left town alone. "What did you take these jobs for?" asked Sleepy, as he and Hashniff saddled their horses at the sheriff's stable. "Just a fool notion that's all," said Hashniff seriously.
"All right," Sleepy retorted grudgingly. "$40 a month, and take orders from some kid." "We ain't took no orders from him yet, Sleepy."
"That's true. I'd kinda like to know what kind of orders he passed out to them other two hired men."
"Wait and see," advised Hashniff. "We'll likely find out."
About a mile out of town they overtook Allenby, who had driven off the side of the road and was waiting for them. "I didn't want to say too much there in town," he told them. "Freeman told me your names at the time he spoke about me hiring you, so I know you are the same men. I think I need your help now more than I did before, and I just want to say that I'm still willing to pay you the sum of $5,000 for evidence that will convict those who have been stealing my stock. The men who have been stealing my stock are the same ones that killed Seeley. A conviction for rustling will fasten the murder on them also. For some reason or other, it appears that we have been working at cross purposes."
"I think you know what I mean." "Don't reckon I do," said Hashniff thoughtfully.
"That matter concerning the Pinto and Gray Horse."
"Oh, yeah.
I heard the sheriff saying something about it."
"What was it all about, Allenby?"
Allenby studied Hashniff and Sleepy for several moments. Sleepy's expression was as innocent as that of a child, while Hashniff's was merely indifferent, as he carefully shaped a cigarette and struck a match with his thumbnail.
"Well," said Allenby dubiously, "perhaps, but it doesn't matter."
He spoke sharply to the team, which surged back into the road, and the two cowboys followed leisurely behind him. "He's still got that 5,000, laughed Hashniff.
"Yeah, and he can keep it," said Sleepy. "I don't want no 30-30 bullets between my shoulders, why betcha." Hashniff and Sleepy did not go to Moolock the next day.
Allenby and his son left early, as they were not sure what time the inquest was to be held.
They gave no orders to Hashniff and Sleepy.
Allenby told them to get used to the ranch, and to take it easy for their first day. The two cowboys had instinctively liked Mrs. Allenby, a quiet little woman. June had colored slightly during her introduction to Hashniff as she recognized him, and wondered if he had remembered her meeting with Bud Bell.
Sleepy did not like the half-circle cross ranch buildings. "Ain't no ways homelike," he complained. "Makes you feel like you're civilized. Even the bunkhouse door don't squeak.
By golly, I'd put some sand into them hinges if I stayed here long.
Carpet on the bunkhouse floor and a receptacle for cigarette butts.
It sure is kinda dude-like," admitted Hashniff. "But you have to excuse Allenby, he's from the city. If he runs cows long enough he'll develop squeaky hinges, bare floors and weather-beaten exteriors." About an hour after Harry and his father left the ranch, June asked Hashniff if he would saddle her horse. She rode a racy-looking little sorrel, a swell fork saddle, and her riding clothes consisted of a divided skirt, flannel shirt, cowboy boots, and a floppy sombrero.
"Mucho buena," exclaimed Sleepy softly, as she rode away.
"That's right," agreed Hashniff. They watched until she disappeared in the hills to the east. There was nothing for them to do except to loaf around. The inquest at Moolock caused a certain amount of interest, and there was quite a crowd present. Allenby admitted that Seeley was a detective, hired for him by Clayton, the cattle buyer. Clayton said he had met Seeley a number of times, and knew that Seeley was a man of ability. The sheriff produced and read Clayton's letter to Seeley, which had been among Seeley's effects, and the hastily picked coroner's jury brought in a verdict that Seeley had been shot in the back by a party or parties unknown.
There was considerable discussion among the cattlemen following the inquest.
They had ignored Allenby's statements regarding the number of cattle he had lost lately, but they were forced to admit that it was serious enough to cause a man to get shot in the back.
Neither Hank nor Bud Bell were in town.
It might have complicated matters a little, as it was well known that there was bad blood between them and Allenby. The inquest was held about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and at about 3 o'clock the stage from White Eagle, 30 miles away, came into town, with the driver, Shorty Elkins, sitting straight in the seat, hanging on with both hands, and with the lines twisted around one foot and held between his knees. The team went past the stage station, caught the right front wheel into the post of a hitch rack and jerked to a sudden stop, so sudden that Shorty pitched off over the wheel and fell against the sidewalk, where he stayed until some of the men picked him up. They straightened him out on the sidewalk and someone poured a drink of whiskey between his white lips. "My gosh," exploded Larry Neal, an Arrowhead cowboy, "somebody has sure riddled poor Shorty.
Somebody get the doctor." Swan River Smith arrived, as did Allenby and Clayton.
Another drink of whiskey, forced between Shorty's lips, seemed to revive him enough to open his eyes. "How are ya, Shorty?" asked Swan River.
"Can you tell us what happened to ya?"
Shorty's eyes were filming, but he was conscious. He tried to lift his hand, but the effort was too much. Several times he twisted his lips, trying to speak.
Then, June Allenby.
He managed to speak her name, spacing it widely. "What about her, Shorty?" asked Swan River anxiously.
"Try it again, son."
He spoke the one word, tried to say more, but was unable to open his mouth again. "Shorty's dead," said Swan River softly, getting to his feet. Fred Hartwell, owner of the stage line, forced his way to the center and looked down at the dead man who had been his driver. Swan River told him all they knew about it, and they watched Hartwell as he examined the contents of the stage.
"The treasure box is gone," he said. "We won't know how much has been stolen until we check up with the office at White Eagle."
The doctor arrived, and after a short examination shook his head, as he listened to a description of how the stage had arrived. "I don't see how he lived that long," declared the doctor.
"He must have fought hard against it." "But what did he mean about my daughter?" asked Allenby anxiously. "What could he have meant?"
"She wasn't on the stage today, was she?" asked the sheriff.
"No.
She was at home when I left there."
Allenby whirled and ran to his buckboard.
"Some of us better ride to the half-circle cross," said the sheriff quickly. "Shorty had that girl on his mind for some reason."
"Dang it, why didn't he live longer?"
Swan River bowlegged his way swiftly toward his stable, with $40 right at his heels, while several of the cowboys mounted and waited for the sheriff to ride with them. But far ahead of them went the team of cream-colored broncos, running at top speed, while the lurching buckboard threatened at any time to capsize and throw Allenby and Clayton out into the sagebrush. Hashkniff and Sleepy were in the bunkhouse when the cavalcade arrived. The horsemen had almost overtaken the team, and when the two cowboys came outside, the yard was filled with riders. Allenby fairly fell out of the buckboard and ran to Hashkniff.
"Is June home?" he panted. Hashkniff shook his head. "No, she ain't.
About an hour after you left this morning, she had me saddle her horse, and she rode away."
"I don't reckon she's come back yet. What's the matter?"
Allenby groaned aloud and turned to the sheriff. "She went riding," he said blankly. "That's all right," said Swan River.
"Which way did she go?"
"Went east from here," said Hashkniff, pointing in that direction.
"Straight toward the White Eagle Road," said a cowboy softly.
"We'll spread out and comb that country," said the sheriff.
"Maybe we can find her."
Allenby ran toward the house, where Mrs. Allenby had come out on the porch, wondering at the crowd of riders, while the sheriff told Hashkniff about Shorty Elkins. "He tried to tell us about her," said Swan River sadly. "Something has happened to her, that's a cinch."
"Shucks, this is a civilized country," said Pete Sepulveda.
"I dunno what could happen to a girl around here." "2 men have been murdered this week," reminded Swan River grimly, and several of the men growled audibly. Hashkniff and Sleepy ran to the stable and saddled their horses, while others helped Allenby and Clayton saddle suitable mounts. It was not over 15 minutes later that they rode out of the ranch yard, spread out fanwise and headed east. Hashkniff and Sleepy were the last ones to see her, so they headed for the spot where she had disappeared. About 6 miles from the ranch they struck the road to White Eagle, which ran north and south. It was here that the riders drew together, searching for the spot where the stage had been held up. The roadbed was so hard that it was impossible to distinguish anything out of the ordinary, so the searchers split into 2 parties, going in opposite directions. Hashkniff and Sleepy joined Swan River Smith, going toward Moolock, and they were the ones to find the spot. It was in a timbered swale, where a small stream trickled down across the road. The signs were fairly plain here. The stage had swerved half off the road into softer ground. To the west of the road a deep cattle trail wound down the swale, where the timber would mask it from the road. Hashkniff discovered the trail, and in it were the fresh imprints of a shod horse. She came down that trail, he told the sheriff, pointing out the tracks. They picked a dandy place for the job, too. It kinda looks like she busted right into the holdup, without knowin' it was Tahkeene Place. She couldn't see the road until she came out through them bushes, and they likely seen her first. Yeah, it looks that-a-way, Hartley, agreed Swan River. Meb they had to do something to save themselves, don't you see? If it was somebody she knew well, it kinda put 'em up against it. Hashkniff examined the tracks closely, squatting on his heels. Swan River turned around to take another look at the trail, and Hashkniff suddenly reached down, picked up a tiny object and put it in his pocket. "Where'll we go now?" he asked Swan River. "The Lord only knows," confessed the sheriff. "There's no way to track him. I've heard about savages being able to follow a trail where there wasn't any, but I'm no savage. Dang it all, that's the worst of being a sheriff. Everybody expects him to be wise as, and with a nose like a bloodhound. Might as well wait for the rest of the gang to come," said Hashkniff. "They'll be bustin' back this way soon." It was a cinch that Shorty Elkins didn't drive an awful long ways, shot up that-a-way. They rolled cigarettes and mused silently. There were no clues to work on. They had found where the stage had been stopped, but it had done them no good, as far as clues were concerned. It was possibly half an hour before the other riders arrived, and Hashkniff showed Allenby what had happened at that spot. Allenby listened dumbly, nodding his head, like a man who was too sick to talk. "You think then that she was merely captured to prevent her from exposing the bandits?" queried Clayton. "That's about the only way to look at it," said Hashkniff. "Men don't steal girls these days. It just ain't done. I don't know this country like some of you do." Hashkniff turned to the crowd. "If any of you was going to steal a girl, where would you hide her?" No one replied. Allenby stared dumbly ahead of him, his jaw shut tightly. "I dunno where to look," confessed Swan River. "It's likely the same gang that held up the train." Allenby turned quickly and stared at the sheriff. "The same too," he said wearily. "Why, sure." He turned and mounted his horse. "Where are you going?" asked Swan River quickly. Allenby picked up his reins, adjusted his belt. "I'm going to kill the men who own a black-headed pinto and a gray horse," he said coldly. "I'm going, if I have to go alone." "Hank Bell," said $40 Dion softly. "Let's talk about it a little," advised Swan River. They wasn't in town today," interrupted Larry Neal. "Neither were we," said Hashkniff, indicating himself and Sleepy. "They've been stealing from me for over 2 years," said Allenby grimly. "I helped to send Bud to the penitentiary. Hank Bell swore he'd get even with me. Their last steal was when they took 300 Herefords from the Moolock loading pens. I hired a detective and they killed him, shot him in the back. The sheriff can't deny that he thinks they robbed that train. He chased them to Tacoma, where they stole Hartley's and Stevens' horses, leaving the Pinto and Gray in their stead. If they'd steal my cattle, rob trains, is there any reason why they wouldn't rob a stage and steal my girl?" "Why sit here and argue about it?" asked Harry Allenby. "Let's go over to the HB and have it out with them." "Allenby's argument looks plausible to me," stated Merton. "It's worth working on, ain't it?" "Worth working on, but it ain't worth killing on," said Swan River. "It's awful easy to make mistakes." "Well, I'm going down there," declared Allenby. "If I have to go alone, I'll go anyway. I'm going to find June." "That's fine," said Hashkniff. "We're all looking for her, Allenby, but we ain't on no killin' spree."
If I'm any judge of humanity, Hank, Bud, and that sticky clay sub shootin' irons. If we go down there, huntin' for trouble, I'll bet we find it. What do you fellers think?" "I don't care what they think," exclaimed Allenby. "I'm going." "Wait a minute," begged Clayton. "Hartley is right, Allenby. Right now you are in no frame of mind to go there.
You know that those 3 men are dangerous.
You are not a gunman.
You wouldn't have 1 chance in 1,000 with them. No, you can't get June back with a 6-shooter.
You are all against me," mourned Allenby pettishly. "Don't you want me to get my daughter back?"
"Don't be a baby," snorted Hashkniff. "This is no time for hysterics." Harry shoved his horse close to Hashkniff. "You let up on that stuff," he ordered. "You can't come in here and tell us what to do."
Hashkniff grinned at Harry and the boy's face flushed hotly.
"Back up, you fool," snorted $40. "If you don't keep your mouth shut, Harry, somebody is going to hit you so hard they'll uncork you."
Harry turned in his saddle and glared at $40. "Bye, I don't have to take things like that," he blurted.
"No, you don't have to," said $40 quietly. "If you've got any good ideas on how to handle this situation, you might step up and disgorge M."
"If you ain't shut up."
"There's a lot of truth in that," agreed Clayton.
"Oh, go to."
Harry was sufficiently squelched to draw his horse back, but his face was black with rage. The sun was just going down behind the hills, and they all knew that there was little daylight left to work in. "If Hartley is right in his surmise, I don't think that June will be injured in any way," said Clayton. "I don't think it is a situation that can be handled by force of arms. If we were lucky enough to blunder into them, it is hard to tell what they might do to keep her from exposing them."
"That sounds like sense," agreed Hashkniff heartily. "This thing is not going to be easy to handle, nor is it a mob job."
"What would you suggest?" asked Allenby.
He seemed more at ease now. "I'd suggest that we go home. Meb the girl wasn't caught at all. We kinda went off half-cocked, just because a Diane man spoke her name. We don't know for sure, don't you see?"
"That's true," agreed Allenby, willing to grasp at any straw.
"I wonder if that isn't true."
Thus Clayton, visibly relieved.
"Let's look at it thataway," suggested Swan River. "Tomorrow is another day."
After a few minutes of conversation, Hashkniff, Sleepy, Harry and his father left the road and went back toward the ranch, while the rest of the searchers went on toward Moolock.
Hashkniff and Sleepy lagged back during that ride across the hills.
"You ain't hopin' to see her at home, are ya?" queried Sleepy. "Hopin', the Sol," said Hashkniff. "We had to bust up that argument some way, Sleepy. It's a cinch that June got grabbed. Just who got her is a mystery.
Me and you are going to Moolock after supper."
But June was not at the ranch.
Allenby's spirits went down below zero.
He had evidently expected to find her there.
Mrs. Allenby seemed very patient. She was not the kind of woman to show great emotion.
Harry came down to the bunkhouse, where Hashkniff and Sleepy were getting ready for supper, and apologized for what he had said. "I'm sorry," he said contritely.
"That argument got on my nerves." "That's all right," grinned Hashkniff. "Mab I'd have done the same thing."
"Just forget it, Harry." "Well, I'm glad you feel that way about it," said Harry.
"Dad seems to have great faith in you too." Hashkniff smiled softly as he hung up his towel.
"Faith is a great thing, Harry," he said.
"If folks ever have faith in you, don't ruin it.
This whole world is built on faith. You can go a long ways if you have faith in yourself, but the minute you lose faith in yourself, you're done. And you're done when others lose faith in you." "Are you a preacher?" asked Harry, a trifle sarcastically.
"A preacher?" Hashkniff squinted thoughtfully. "No, I'm not a preacher, Harry. Meb, I'm my brother's keeper." "What's that? Did you ever read the Bible?" "No. I'm not religious." Hashkniff smiled. "What is religion, Harry?" "I dunno. Lot of Bible backs, I reckon." Harry turned away and went out of the bunkhouse. Sleepy grinned at Hashkniff and said, Shall we sing a hymn before supper, cowboy?
Hashkniff squinted seriously as the cook hammered on the triangle at the kitchen door, calling them to supper.
No, he said slowly, I don't think we'll sing, Sleepy. A little prayer might be a lot better. A prayer for who, Hashkniff, us?
It all depends on what's in the big book, partner.
Let's eat. So it's come all ye punchers? Put your belly to the bar. And drink a fare ye well. 'Cause I'm going mighty far. With a wang de oodle addy eye.
Thus sang Lem Elder, a tall, weary-looking cowboy who worked for Sam Bass of the 27A outfit as he rested his elbows on the White Horse Saloon bar. Pete Sepulveda was sitting on a card table, chin in hands, but now he looked up reprovingly at Lem.
Ya hadn't ought to sing, Lem, he said. Songs ain't appreciated in Moolock tonight. You know, they ain't found that girl yet. That's right, nodded Lem. Excuse me.
That whiskey they sell here makes you sing.
Is anybody huntin' for her, Pete? Not now, I guess. Allenby and his bunch went home.
Wasn't much they could do in the dark. I seen Harry and them two strange punchers ride in a while ago. Thus Pinion Mead, another of Sam Bass' men. Pinion was small of stature, but wide of shoulder. He had been so nicknamed from his fondness for pinion nuts.
That's Hartley and Stevens, offered Pete. They took the place of Omaha and Chet Hoban at the half-circle cross. Hoban and Olson get fired, queried Lem. Yesterday. Had a run-in with Allenby. They're still here in town. They're two dongade good cowhands.
Where did Hartley and Stevens come from, asked Pinion.
I dunno.
Just drifted in, I suppose.
Good cowhands? I'll betcha they are.
Harry Allenby came in, his face flushed with drink, and set up the drinks to the three cowboys.
Any news? Queried Pete.
Not a thing, replied Harry, glancing toward the door.
Bud Bell is in town. Alone? Asked Pete.
The old man and Sticky Clay are with him. Put your troubles in your war bag, advised Pete meaningly.
You think I'm afraid of them? Harry drained his glass and flipped it back on the bar. He was drunk enough to be reckless. I would be, said Lem Elder seriously. You fellers make me tired. I'll get 'em one at a time. Pinion Mead laughed and walked out of the place. Harry's eyes snapped angrily.
The strong liquor was percolating through his veins, taking away what little judgment he might have had. He rubbed the palm of his right hand on the butt of his revolver, and his lips screwed into a sneering grin. His nose and upper lip were still swollen a little, and he did not look pretty. He did not notice that Pete and Lem had stepped away from him, nor that the bartender had moved quietly toward the other end of the bar. He was facing the door, squinting at the floor, and now he looked up to see Sticky Clay framed in the doorway.
Harry blinked, as though not believing his eyes. Clay did not move.
Then Harry swayed away from the bar, his right hand streaking for his gun. Harry was fast with his draw, but not fast enough.
The experienced gunman in the doorway flipped his hand forward, fired almost from his hip.
Clay's draw was almost too fast for the eye to follow.
Harry took a half step backward, dropped his gun and fell forward on his face, arms outspread.
For several moments Clay leaned forward, watching him. Then he straightened up, snapped his gun back in the holster and spoke to Pete.
You saw this, Pete? Pete nodded quickly. Yeah, we all seen it, Sticky. Looking for it, wasn't he, Pete? Yeah, he was. Got it, didn't he? Pete nodded. Everybody satisfied then, Sticky Clay turned and disappeared.
Pete and Lem turned Harry over, expecting to find him dead, but he was far from it. The heavy bullet had scored along his head from the left temple to his left ear, where it had taken the top of his ear off cleanly. He was bleeding freely, but recovering nicely from the shock. An inch farther to the right, and Harry Allenby would have been a casualty. They helped him into a chair and bound his head in a none-too-clean handkerchief. The report of the gun had caused the curious to go searching for its cause, with the result that Harry was soon surrounded, and the White Horse Saloon began doing a good business. Swan River Smith investigated, and nodded over Pete Sepulveda's story, while Hashkniff and Sleepy listened closely. He was looking for trouble, Swan River, said Pete.
I don't blame Clay a bit.
Harry started his draw first. And that settles it, said the sheriff.
As long as it was an even break.
Someone had gone after the doctor, who bandaged Harry, in spite of Harry's protests that he did not need any attention. You let him do it, said Clayton.
If you don't have it fixed up now, you'll be marked for life. You're lucky.
The shock had sobered Harry, and he had nothing to say. Hashkniff and Sleepy crossed the street to the general merchandise store, where they found Hank and Bud Bell.
Bud nodded to them.
Several men were in the store, talking about the missing girl and about the stage robbery. Hashkniff bought some tobacco and began rolling a cigarette, when he saw Bud Bell signal him to come outside.
Bud sauntered out and in a few moments Hashkniff followed him. Sleepy had seen the signal to Hashkniff, but did not go with him.
Bud had walked down the sidewalk out of the lights, and Hashkniff joined him.
Hartley, he said, without any preliminaries, I want you to tell me all about this.
I've heard several tales, but they are all different.
Neb mine is, too, said Hashkniff. Anyway, here's how it looked from my knothole.
He told Bud all he knew about the shooting of Shorty Elkins and the disappearance of June Allenby.
Bud did not interrupt.
He told Bud his conclusions regarding the reasons for June's disappearance.
Thank ya, Hartley, he said. Do you remember Slim Stout? Slim Stout?
Hashkniff took the cigarette out of his mouth and nodded slowly.
Yeah, I do. I sent him to the pen.
That's where I met him, Hartley.
He told me about you. Faso?
Yes. He's still got 5 years before he can look for a parole or a pardon.
He says you let him off easy.
Shell stuck in my gun, said Hashkniff.
Slim didn't know it, I reckon. Bud laughed shortly. Slim didn't tell it that way. Likely lied to ya.
Now listen, Bell, as friend to friend, I want to warn ya.
Things are getting hotter every minute.
Allenby has piled up evidence enough to hang a king, that is, outside the law. Sticky Clay and Harry Allenby just tried to kill each other a while ago, as you know.
Allenby didn't get hurt much.
As friend to friend, said Bud wonderingly.
Something like that. Why? Was it you who turned those 2 horses loose? I needed the stable space, lied Hashkniff. Yeah? And now you're working for Allenby? Externally. Why are you taking an interest in me, Hartley? I dunno. Why does the wind blow? Ask me something easy.
Now you take my advice and don't go to sleep. I know that all 3 of you are able to get along without crutches, but you can't buck the whole county.
I'm doing all I can, Bell. If they hang ya, that won't help me much, nor you either. I'm going to sneak out to see ya just as soon as I can. Thanks, Hartley. Don't thank me.
Hashkniff turned and walked across the street to the Elk Saloon, leaving Bud alone to think it over.
More men were coming into town.
Bud walked back to the store, signaled to his father, and together they got their horses. They knew that Sticky had gone home after the shooting, to prevent complications which were bound to ensue if he stayed in town. Things look kinda cranky, Bud, observed the old man.
Yeah, and I'm afraid they'll get worse, Dad. Stealing a girl is bad business.
There's a lot of talk and a lot of whiskey in Moolock tonight, so we better keep out of sight. I wish Sticky had kept away from Harry Allenby, but Harry was looking for it, and Clay is always willing to accommodate. They tell me that Harry started the draw first. Young Allenby is a fool to draw with Clay, observed the old man.
What did that tall cowpuncher want, Bud? Wanted to give me some advice. He's working for Allenby, ain't he? Yeah. Well, we don't need any advice from that outfit.
This didn't come from the outfit, Dad. If it ever comes to a showdown, don't hurt that tall puncher.
And if he asks you to do something, do it. Who in is he, Bud?
He turned the Pinto and Gray out of Swan River's stable.
But he's working for Allenby, Bud. Yeah.
I don't sabe it, but I'm willing to follow his advice. While the Bell family rode homeward, Hashkniff went to the White Horse Saloon. Harry Allenby was still there, but fairly sober now. His head was bandaged and he was unable to wear his hat. Swan River took Hashniff aside and imparted the information that there was too much talk, mixed with whiskey, to suit him. "This girl stealin' has worked everybody up to a pitch," he declared. "Dang it, they'll ruin everything if they start out on a rampage.
I've done a lot of talkin', and I've kinda got some of 'em sore at me." "Are Bud and Hank still in town?"
"Just left a few minutes ago," said Hashniff.
"I think Clay left just after the shootin' nut."
More men came into the saloon. Hashniff and Swan River sat down at a vacant card table near the rear of the room, where they could watch the place. Harry Allenby was drinking again, and seemed to parade his bandages, talking loudly. "Swan River, have you still got that letter, the one that Seeley had in his pocket?" asked Hashniff. The sheriff drew it out of an inside pocket and handed it to Hashniff, who spread it out on the table. For several minutes he studied it closely, squinting away from the smoke of his cigarette. He was about to fold it up, when something caused him to look at it again. After concentrating on it for a space of time, he looked up at Swan River, a grin widening his mouth.
"What's funny in that letter?" asked Swan River. "Nothin'," grinned Hashniff. "I was just thinkin' about something else. Mind if I keep this letter?" Swan River shook his head. "It ain't of no use to me." $40 came in and walked straight to their table. 40 was serious as he sat down. "Something is going to bust pretty soon," he declared. "Over at the Elk, they're talking too much to suit me.
Some son of a gun has told about them 2 horses, and a few of the gang wants to know if the sheriff's office is standing in with the robbers."
Swan River's jaw clamped tightly and he got to his feet.
"I'll answer their questions," he rasped, and started for the door. Clayton was coming in, and they almost collided. Clayton's sleeve was torn and he had the general appearance of one who had been fighting. He stepped away from the sheriff and went to the bar, where he drank alone, turned with his back against the bar and looked around the room. "Kinda looks like friend Clayton had been fightin'," observed $40.
40's observation was punctuated with a zz-zwap.
Clayton's shoulders thudded back against the bar and Hashniff went sidewise out of his chair, while from outside came the report of a shot. Clayton ducked, putting the end of the bar between himself and the open doorway, while the rest of the crowd scattered to get out of line. For several moments Clayton clawed at his shirt front. The bullet had burned across his chest, tearing a shallow furrow, but doing little damage, after which it passed within a short distance of Hashniff's head and thudded into the rear wall.
"Hurt you much?" asked Hashniff.
Clayton shook his head, sprang to his feet and ran out through the rear entrance. Disregarding a possible second shot, Hashniff and $40 ran out through the front doorway and into the street. It was too dark, beyond the front window illumination, for them to see anyone. Swan River came running from the Elk Saloon, followed by several men, who had heard the shot. But the shooter had made himself scarce. Hashniff drew Swan River aside and together they made the rounds of the saloons, checking up on the cowboys. As far as they were able to find out, no one was missing, except Clayton.
"Do you reckon they was trying to kill you or Clayton?" asked Sleepy, who joined them at the Elk.
"That's hard to tell, Sleepy. We'll figure it was Clayton. He'd had trouble with somebody just before that shot was fired.
If we can find Clayton, Neb he'll tell who it was if he knows."
But they were unable to find Clayton, so Swan River opined that Clayton was hiding out.
The folks of Moolock Town were getting plenty of food for conversation.
Hashniff was curious about the trouble between Harry Allenby and Sticky Clay, so he found Pete Sepulveda and asked him about it. "Harry was looking for it," explained Pete, a trifle thickly. "Pinion Mead, Lem Elder, me and Harry was there in the saloon, when Harry got to making his war talk.
Pinion pulled out and in a few seconds we happens to see Sticky in the doorway.
Harry don't see him for a while, you see.
Pretty soon he looks up and sees Sticky.
They look at each other about a second and Harry breaks for his gun. Sticky makes his draw, shoots from his hip, and Harry falls on his nose. Sticky thinks he's killed Harry, I reckon, but he ain't excited. It was an even break, facile." "Much obliged, Pete," said Hashniff thoughtfully.
"Has there ever been any trouble between Harry and Pinion Mead?" "I don't reckon there has. Pinion ain't quarrelsome."
Hashniff drifted back to Swan River and Sleepy, where he found Frank Allenby, listening to Swan River tell about the gun battle between Harry and Sticky Clay.
Allenby said little. He seemed to have aged greatly in the last few hours. Hashniff drew him aside. "Has there ever been any trouble between you and Pinion Mead?" asked Hashniff. "Not at all," replied Allenby. "Why do you ask?" "Just wonderin', Thassel. You heard about somebody shootin' at Clayton, haven't ya?" Allenby nodded quickly. "Yes, but I do not understand it. I can't find Clayton anywhere. He is not at the hotel."
"There's a fly in the axle grease somewhere," mused Hashniff.
"I don't know what to do," admitted Allenby. "Knows, I can't stand it much longer. My wife just sits and looks at the wall. I wish she could cry. It helps a woman to cry, don't you think so, Hartley?"
"Not as much as it does to laugh, Allenby."
"I want to ask you a personal question. Is Clayton going to marry your daughter?" "What has that to do?" "I'm a skin not answerin', Allenby." "Suppose he is, what about it? Is there anyone else who might want her bad enough to kill Clayton over her?" Allenby took a deep breath and shut his jaw tightly for a moment. Then, "Do you suppose that is why he tried to kill Clayton?" "He? Who do you mean, Allenby?" But Allenby refused to say.
Harry went past them, his bandaged head visible in the weak light, and went into the Elk Saloon. He staggered slightly, laughing loudly with the other men. Allenby left Hashniff and went into the saloon. Hashniff found Sleepy and together they went from place to place, listening to the general talk. It was mostly whiskey conversation, and Hashniff did not feel that they were going to do anything rash. Later on he found Swan River, visibly relieved. "I think everything will be all right," he told them. "I've talked with a few of them, including Allenby, and they've all agreed to wait until mornin'. I've promised to lead a posse out to the HB ranch after daylight. If they, well, I dunno. Dang it, I've done the best I could, Hartley." "Nobody can say that ya ain't been fair," agreed Hashniff. "Meb I've been too fair, Hartley. Still, I discount everything that happens, when there's hate behind it." Christman hated old Hank Bell. Mab Allenby bought that hate along with the ranch. "How did they happen to catch Bud Bell that time?" asked Hashniff.
"When they sent him to the penitentiary? That was a little over 2 years ago."
Allenby and Clayton had only been here a few months at that time, were riding through the hills, looking over the stock. They were over near Two Men Cannon when they caught a glimpse of a man, who kinda seemed to be misbranding a couple of critters. Had M roped and was heatin' his iron, I reckon. Anyway, he seen M, too, so he snaps out of the brush on his horse, and hits into the hills, with Allenby and Clayton after him. He sure led M a merry chase, I guess. Allenby and Clayton got separated, and after a while they gives up the chase. Clayton circles back to the two roped animals, and is looking M over when Allenby gets back. They're both branded fresh with the HB iron, kinda rough like, and where the half-circle cross ought to be, is a big spot burned over with a hot dry pan. The rustlers sure must have been nervous to burn over that much space inventing an ordinary brand. The HB ain't very artistic, but there she is. That was all the evidence against Bud Bell. Old Hank couldn't have done it, on account of being crippled, and Sticky Clay was in a poker game at the Elk all that afternoon, which was an alibi for him. So they sent Bud up for stealin' half-circle cross stock. Didn't Bud have any defense at all? How could he? Nobody would steal cattle for the HB. You know, Bud used to wear one of them 5-gallon sombreros, with a wide band, kinda studded with silver rosettes. Oh, you could see it a mile away, glistening in the sun. Anyway, both Allenby and Clayton testified that this rustler wore no hat. Allenby says he was sure the man had a hat when they seen him first, but that he was bareheaded when he made his getaway. Allenby says he was too excited to remember just what kind of a hat this man had on when they seen him first. But it kinda made things worse for Bud. He'd naturally hide the hat, cause it was so well known and easy to identify. And they didn't get close enough to identify him for sure? Nope. But their evidence sure convinced the jury. The half-circle crossbrands on the right shoulder, and the HB on the right hip, don't they? Asked Hashniff.
Yeah.
Bud sure vented a lot of space on the right shoulder of them two critters.
No argument about MB and half-circle cross animals?
There might have been, partly, but you could look real close and find the old scars of the original brand. They'd never showed up after a few days, when the new burn healed. No, there was no question about MB and Allenby's stock.
And the vented spot was bigger than the old brand, eh?
Yes, 4 or 5 times as big.
Aha, Hashkniff grew thoughtful. And you think there's no danger of anybody doing anything rash tonight, Sheriff?
Nope. They'll likely drink a lot of liquor and kinda gird up their loins, but that's about all.
Will you ride out to the HB with us in the morning?
Very likely.
I reckon we'll go back to the ranch and get a little sleep now. Sleepy complained about leaving Moolock.
It looked to Sleepy as though there might be trouble, and he did not want to miss any of it. He grumbled audibly, but rode out of town with Hashkniff. I suppose, he said sarcastically, that old folks like you have got to have their sleep, Hashkniff. You betcha, agreed Hashkniff.
Do you know the way to the HB ranch?
I can find it, Hashkniff.
You say, what's the idea? Go and visitin', Sleepy. Folks ought to be neighborly, hadn't they?
The road runs kinda southeast, so we better swing to the left.
What are we going to do out there? Didn't Swan River say that he was? Going out there after daylight, agreed Hashkniff.
That's the trouble with the ordinary sheriff, Sleepy, they want to make a parade out of it.
They never find out anything. What do you expect to find out, cowboy?
Parter, ya never know what to expect.
Anyway, we're going out that way and see what we'll see. Probably won't see anything, meb we will. Aha. Dubiously. What was the idea of all them questions about Bud stealing cows and getting sent to the pen? Morbid curiosity, Sleepy. I just love to hear about grief and misery.
Oh, go to, snorted Sleepy.
Very likely, if there is such a place, Sleepy.
It was about 7 miles to the HB ranch from Moolock. The road wound through the hills, with little regard for grades, a strange road to the two cowboys, who only knew that somewhere along it was the HB ranch house. In fact, at the end of it was the ranch, as it did not extend beyond. There was no room yet, but the ribbon of road was easy to follow. The last few miles they rode silently, only the muffled sound of the horses in the dust to tell of their coming. The HB ranch buildings stood in the wide flat at the mouth of a cannon, and their silhouette was plainly visible from the road, which approached from a lower level. No lights were visible, but Hashkniff felt that somewhere around that black bulk of buildings someone was watching. They dismounted and led their horses away from the road into a clump of trees, which would screen them from anyone passing on the way to or from the ranch. Got to get higher, said Hashkniff, as he led the way out of the trees, keeping well away from the ranch, circling toward a rise of ground back of the stable. They were forced to proceed at a slow pace for fear of running into loose barbed wire or other unknown difficulties. At last they reached a point where they could look down on the group of buildings, and here they sat down to wait. It was well after midnight when they reached this point, and an hour later there was sufficient moonlight to enable them to distinguish something of the buildings and general contour of the surrounding country. For a long time there was no sound, except the soft bawling of a cow in the corral. Far out in the hills a coyote called mournfully, and from the house came the short bark and growl of a dog.
Then all was still again.
Hour after hour went past, while the two cowboys huddled in the sage, unmoving, and worst of all, unsmoking. The false dawn lighted the hills, and a chill wind swept down the cannon, causing the two cowboys to sink lower into the protecting brush.
Suddenly Hashkniff sat up.
The dim figure of a man had crossed the corral and faded into the shadows of the stable.
"Did ya see him?" asked Hashkniff softly.
"Yeah," Sleepy shivered.
"He went into the stable. Probably one of the HB outfit doing his chores early.
Of all the fools on earth, we're the worst.
Set tin out here in the cold all night, there he goes back again."
The man crossed the corral again, going in the opposite direction. He either went through a gate or crawled through the fence, and blended with the shadows so well that they were unable to see him again. They listened to see if they could hear him shut a door in the house, but there was no sound. After several moments the dog barked loudly, and from over on the side of a hill came the snapping bark of a coyote. The dog, evidently under leash, grew frantic with its barking, but the coyote did not respond. Hashkniff laughed softly. "What's so dongade funny?" asked Sleepy. "That coyote." "What is funny about a coyote?" "Nothing in general, Sleepy, but that one probably smokes cigarettes and packs a gun." "You mean that it wasn't a coyote, Hashkniff?" "That's what I mean." "Ah. Why would any man imitate a coyote thataway?" "To make the dog bark." "Oh, yeah." Sarcastically. Sleepy was chilled to the bone and aching for a cigarette. "Why would he want to make a dog bark, if I may ask ya?" "So that anybody would think he was barking at a coyote." All right. Someday I'm going to ask you a question and get an intelligent answer." "And what then, Sleepy?" "The shock will kill me." Hashkniff laughed softly and got to his feet. "Let's sneak down there and see what that jigger was doing." "He never went into the house, so I don't figure he's part and parcel of the HB outfit." Cautiously they made their way down the hill and came in behind the stable. Daylight was coming swiftly now, but there was no sign of the man who had crossed the corral. They slid through the corral fence, circled the interior until opposite the door of the stable, where they again passed through the fence. Part of a long, low shed blocked their view of the house. "Wait here and keep watch," whispered Hashkniff. "I'm going inside." Sleepy crouched against the fence, while Hashkniff opened the stable door and went inside. He was in there so long that Sleepy became nervous. It was daylight now, and Sleepy felt like a burglar. He turned his head and looked toward the road. Only a few hundred yards away, coming up the road, was a big group of horsemen. "That sheriff's posse," snorted Sleepy. He ran to the stable door to notify Hashkniff and met him coming out. "Swan River and his men are here," he blurted. "What's the matter, did ya go to sleep in there?" Hashkniff ran to the corner of the stable and watched the horsemen swing in toward the house. "Come on," he whispered, running straight back toward the hill, keeping the stable between him and the ranch house. Sleepy was at his heels, and together they tumbled into a shallow washout behind some wild rose bushes. "We can get back to the horses by going down this washout," said Hashkniff. "Keep your head down and come on." Swiftly they went down the narrow ravine, where the floodwaters had gouged out the soft silt, coming out at the upper edge of a large brush patch, just above the thicket of cottonwoods. It did not take them long to get their horses, swing back into the road and head for the ranch house. The posse was grouped at the ranch house door, talking to Old Hank, Bud, and Sticky Clay. Swan River had dismounted and was leaning against the porch, but the rest of the crowd were still in their saddles. They turned to look as Hashkniff and Sleepy rode up to them. "Missed ya in town, Sheriff," said Hashkniff. The sheriff nodded and turned to Hank Bell. "I'm not charging you with anything, Hank. I want you to understand that right here. There's been so much talk that I had an idea that we ought to come out here this morning and find out how much of it was worth arguing about." Old Hank squinted at the posse, which was composed of Merton, Sepulveda, Allenby, Sam Bass, Larry Neal, $40, Lem Elder, Omaha Olson and Chet Hoban. "Well," said Old Hank slowly, "what do you want to do?" He seemed curiously meek, weary. "Just to satisfy everybody, suppose we search the place," suggested Swan River. Old Hank squinted closely at Swan River, as though wondering what they expected to find. "Go ahead," said Bud slowly. "I reckon we can stand for that." Old Hank nodded in agreement, and the posse dismounted. "We'll help ya, if you need us," grinned Sticky Clay. Old Hank threw open the front door, and the posse filed inside, led by Swan River Smith. Hashkniff and Sleepy did not go with them, but sat down on the little front porch. It did not take long to search the house, and then the posse split into two parts, to search the stable and other outhouses. Hashkniff followed now, and helped them go over every inch of the place. For about an hour they stayed at the HB, leaving no stone unturned in their efforts to uncover some evidence. But their time was wasted and they came back to their horses. "Satisfied?" asked Bud. Swan River nodded, as he swung into his saddle. "Yeah, I'm satisfied, Bud, and I hope the rest are." The rest of them did not express an opinion. Allenby slumped in his saddle, paying little attention to anyone during the ride back to town. He had hoped to find June at the HB ranch. "You never find girl there," declared Sam Bass.
"Belle's no fool. We find nothing there."
"That's the way I felt about it," said Swan River. "If Belle did rob the stage and steal the girl, he wouldn't put her in a showcase for us to look at. This idea of going out in a crowd is all foolishness, I tell ya."
"Like Hartley said yesterday, this is a one or two man job."
"That's right," agreed Sam. Allenby, Hashniff and Sleepy did not stop in Moolock, but rode onto the half-circle cross, intending to get breakfast at the ranch.
"I wish I knew what to do," said Allenby wearily. "There is no clue, nothing to work on."
"The sheriff is right when he says that those who stole June will not keep her where we can find her."
"If they want money." "I don't reckon they do," said Hashniff.
"I know how you feel, Allenby. I sabe how your wife must feel about it, but it's something that can't be helped right now."
"Did you see anything of Clayton after he got shot last night?"
"No, I didn't see him, but Harry did. He told Harry he was going to the ranch. I think someone tried to kill him and that he was frightened into leaving town." "Harry had a close call," observed Sleepy.
Allenby nodded sadly, but did not express an opinion.
It seemed as though his hatred of the HB outfit had burned out, or had burned him out. Mrs. Allenby came from the house to meet them, hoping that they brought news, but was doomed to disappointment. She did not speak. Allenby turned his horse over to Hashniff to unsaddle, and walked to the house with her. Hashniff and Sleepy stabled the horses and walked back to the bunkhouse. Clayton was sitting on the porch of the ranch house, smoking. "Well, we're just as wise as we were before we went to the HB, said Sleepy, stretching himself out on a bunk. "Lost one whole night's sleep and didn't gain a darn thing. That was probably one of the HB outfit that crossed the corral this morning, Dot." "I don't hardly think so," said Hashniff, yawning wearily.
"It wasn't none of the HB outfit that barked like a coyote." "Ah, shucks." Sleepy did not believe that a man had barked like a coyote. "Well, the dog barked," reminded Hashniff. "Yeah, the dog barked. He was tied up. And if the coyote hadn't barked, some of the HB would have come out to see why the dog barked, wouldn't they?" Sleepy sat up and scratched his head thoughtfully. "Yeah, I suppose so, Hashniff. The coyote barked first, didn't it? Then the man crossed the corral. After he left, the coyote barked closer, didn't it? And the dog barked again at the coyote. Well, what has the coyote got to do with it? What had the man to do with it?" "You always make a lot out of nothing, Hashniff. You make me lose a whole night's sleep, and then you make boogers out of a man crossing a corral, or a coyote that sounds like a man. What good did it do us, I'd ask ya?" Hashniff walked to the window and looked toward the house. Allenby was sitting on the ranch house porch, talking to Clayton, and there was no one else in sight. Hashniff turned and came back to Sleepy's bunk. He reached inside his shirt and drew out 2 flat envelopes covered with seals, which had been broken, 2 empty manila envelopes, which had been shipped as valuable packages by an express company. Sleepy took them in his hands and looked them over. "I had an awful time finding 'em in that barn," said Hashniff, as he took them back and slipped them back inside his shirt. "They were under a currycomb and brush in a little box on the wall." "That's some of the loot from the train robbery," whispered Sleepy. "They once held some of the loot," corrected Hashniff. "But the posse couldn't find anything, Dot." "There wasn't anything left," grinned Hashniff. Sleepy squinted at the ceiling thoughtfully. "Then, Hashniff, who searched that box on the wall?" Hashniff grinned widely and shook his head. "Swan River Smith did. These Moolock outlaws ain't fools, cowboys. Now will you believe that a man barked like a coyote, Sleepy?" "I'd believe that they buzzed like a rattler, if you say so." "Right now I'm in the right frame of mind to believe anything. Have you got any clue, Hashniff, anything to work on?" "Oh, you wouldn't say so, if you had a million clues." "Yeah, I've got a clue, but I can't tell you what it is." "All right. Keep me in ignorance. Don't blame me for what nature done to ya, Sleepy. Let's snore a few lines, whatcha say?" "Mab, we'll need it." "I can always do that, pardner. Sleep is first name." While Hashkniff and Sleepy slumbered in the bunkhouse, Allenby told Clayton about their failure to secure any evidence against the HB outfit.
He told of the search and of Hank Bell's willingness to have them search the place. "He's no fool," grumbled Clayton. "He's been expecting trouble for a long time, and he surely wouldn't take a chance on having any incriminating evidence in sight. If he and his outfit robbed that stage and kidnapped June, they wouldn't take her to the ranch." "No, I suppose not, Clayton."
"Have you any idea who shot at you?"
Not in the least. Clayton shook his head, as he felt of his bandaged chest, where the bullet had scored his breastbone.
"You haven't had any trouble with anyone, have you?" Clayton shook his head again quickly. "Not a bit of it."
"The only person who might have done it would be that fellow Clay, who shot Harry."
"Did you have any trouble with Clay?" "Not a bit. I just thought perhaps he might be sore at all of us.
I have been out here so much that they seem to think that I am one of the half-circle cross outfit."
"I suppose so," said Allenby dubiously.
"Still, it is hardly reasonable, Clayton. Sticky Clay is a gunman, and I don't think he would try to murder you in cold blood." "Well, pick a more likely man to suspect." Clayton was angered a little over Allenby's insistence.
"I've thought about it until I can't arrive at any conclusion. Perhaps that bullet was intended for Hartley. It did not miss him far. That might be possible, too."
"Where is Harry?"
"He went back to town this morning after breakfast." "Did Hartley and Stevens ride with the posse?" "They got there after we did." "What time did they leave here this morning?" "They didn't sleep here last night." "Didn't they? That's queer."
Swan River Smith said they had gone back to the ranch.
"They didn't stay in Moolock." "Well, they didn't stay here," declared Clayton. "Harry and I slept in the bunkhouse." He turned his chair and looked at Allenby, as he lowered his voice. "Do you know much about those two men?" Allenby nodded slowly.
"I know what Freeman told me. He said that Hartley was the shrewdest cattle detective that ever wore a gun. I am not going to question what they do, Clayton. If they wanted to tell the sheriff that they were coming here to the ranch last night, and went elsewhere, that is their business."
"But you did not hire them as detectives?" "I did not.
But I told them both that my former offer of $5,000 for a conviction still stands, and that they could do as they pleased while on the job."
"Well, that's different," nodded Clayton. "I just didn't understand the arrangement. I think I'll go back to town and see if anything new has turned up. Want to go along?" "Not now, Ed."
Allenby went into the house, while Clayton, deep in thought, went to the stable, saddled his horse and rode toward Moolock.
The cook at the half-circle cross did not believe in cooking and serving meals in the middle of the afternoon, but he made an exception in the case of Hashkniff and Sleepy. Woodtick Wiley was an old camp cook, sour of disposition, crippled in both knees with rheumatism, and filled with indignation at the way the United States was run by those at Washington. "If I was the governor of this Dongate state, I'd have troops in here, by Gene," he told Hashkniff confidentially. "See Enya imagine such a condition of affairs?" "See Enya? I can't. Somebody steals a girl. They ought to be torn limb from limb." Woodtick shredded a helpless biscuit by way of illustration. "Yeah, you're right," admitted Hashkniff.
"You sure do mingle a wonderful egg, old-timer."
"Don't I?"
"When it comes to eggs, I know more than the first hen what laid one."
"I had a chance to cook Fr. Teddy Rosenfeld once. Ain't they doing nothing to try and retrieve that girl? Best Dongate girl ya ever seen, too. Allenby don't do nothing much. Helpless as."
"Her ma is in there." He lowered his voice and came closer. "She's in there looking at June's picture."
"Just looking at it, mind ya. Acts like June was dead." "Yes, sir, she ain't eaten nothing since yesterday. Got a good appetite, too, most of the time. S hinges.
Wish I was sheriff of this county. I'd sure run somebody a ragged race." "Kinda hard for the sheriff to get something to work on," said Hashkniff, his mouth filled with egg.
"Work on? I'd make something to work on. Who shot at Clayton?" "Nobody knows, eh? Sticky Clay smoked up Harry, did he?"
By the muddy Missouri River, this here county is gettin' as salty as Utah.
Want more eggs? Got a slew of 'em. No?
Seems kinda funny to me that none of the other women folks around this county have come in to weep with Mrs. Allenby, observed Sleepy.
Ain't nothin' funny about it, denied Woodtick. Allenby is to blame for it all. He's been so dongate uppity, facile. He ain't never fit in with reg'lar folks.
Thinks he's worth more than they are.
You can't do that. Don't make friends, eh?
Thus Hashkniff.
Don't make nothin' but money. And somebody steals the profits, eh? They sure do.
I kinda think that some folks don't believe that Allenby lost as much stock as he says he has, but he's lost it all right.
It's killin' him by inches. Allenby don't think no more of a dollar than he does of his family, or not much more, anyway.
Hashkniff pushed away from the table and began rolling a cigarette.
They tell me that he don't give his family much to spend. Much. Nothin' dot. They thanked Woodtick for the meal and went outside.
Mrs. Allenby was standing on the front porch, looking off across the hills, shading her eyes. Hashkniff studied her for a moment, before going around to the porch. She lowered her hand away from her eyes and looked at Hashkniff. I was just looking, she said simply.
Yes'm, he nodded. The hills are kinda pretty this time of day. Pretty?
She shook her head slowly. I didn't notice much.
Where is Mr. Allenby? He asked. I think he went to town. Oh, yeah, I suppose he did. I wish Harry would come home. He stays away most of the time these days. Where do you suppose June is? I dunno, ma'am. It's all kinda mixed up. Clayton was going to marry June, wasn't he?
Mrs. Allenby stared at Hashkniff, and a little color came back to her white cheeks.
Who told you that? She asked. I don't remember. It wasn't a secret, was it, Mrs. Allenby? No, I don't know.
She shook her head slowly.
Mr. Allenby wouldn't. He didn't want Clayton for a son-in-law, eh? Did he tell you that? No, he didn't, Mrs. Allenby. Would you want him? Mr. Clayton? Yeah. Why, what right have you to ask me a question of that kind?
Mrs. Allenby, I don't want to pry into your secrets, but I've got to know a few things.
If you want your daughter back. Oh, but I do.
Mrs. Allenby gripped the porch post and stared at Hashkniff. I would sacrifice anything to get June home again.
Sure you would.
You'll get her, ma'am, but you've got to have a lot of patience.
Now, I want you to answer me this. Does June want to marry Clayton?
She turned away, shaking her head.
All right. But you've done quite a lot to convince her that she ought to marry him, ain't ya?
Mrs. Allenby turned quickly and stared at him. What makes you say that? She asked hoarsely. Because it is true, Hashkniff knew that his guess had been correct.
Now you are going to tell me why you wanted June to marry Clayton. How did you find out these things?
Mrs. Allenby's face was white, but her voice did not tremble now.
Who told you? Nobody, ma'am. Meb, I read it in the clouds. I just want you to tell me why you promoted Clayton. Promoted him? Well, something like that. Go ahead and talk about it.
For several moments Hashkniff was afraid that she was going to rebel. Finally she sat down in a rocking chair near him, and he knew that the point was won. It was the wrong thing to do, she began slowly. But you do not know my husband. His one ambition is money. All his life he has been a slave to money. No, I am not complaining, nor excusing myself. I did wrong, and I will admit everything I have done. Ed Clayton has wanted to marry June ever since he first came here to buy cattle. June did not seem to care for him. Mr. Allenby liked him as a cattle buyer, but he did not want him to marry June. I did not dislike Ed Clayton. He was a gentleman, until... Mrs. Allenby shook her head sadly. At any rate he asked Mr. Allenby for June's hand, and was refused. It did not seem to make any difference to Clayton. He told me about it all, and asked me to intercede for him.
I knew it was useless.
When Mr. Allenby makes up his mind to a thing, nothing can change him. I told Mr. Clayton that it would not help his case in any way. He and Harry were great friends, so Harry came and asked me to help Clayton out.
Harry liked Clayton, who always had money. You know, Harry never has any money.
His father does not believe in giving children money, and he does not realize that Harry and June have grown up.
Later I began to hear stories about Harry.
They said that he was drinking and gambling. I know that his father heard the same stories, but he merely laughed and proved to me that it was all lies, because Harry had no money to drink and gamble with.
Ed Clayton knew that I idolized my children. He knew that I would go to any length to help them. So one day he came to me and asked me to see if I couldn't help him win June. I gave him the same answer.
He did not get angry, nor did he threaten, but he did show me receipts for borrowed money, a total of $5,000, signed with Harry's name.
Clayton had loaned Harry all that money.
Clayton knew what Mr. Allenby would do if he knew that Harry had done such a thing. But Clayton did not threaten me.
He just pointed out the fact that someone must pay that money. He had loaned it in good faith. He said to me,
"Mrs. Allenby, I love June more than anything in the world, and I will try to make her happy.
I feel sure that a little urging will win for me. And, in that event, I will give you these receipts, and everything will be forgotten." That is why I tried to. I know it was all wrong, but...
Yeah, it was all wrong, Mrs. Allenby, agreed Hashniff. But my urging did not help. Mrs. Allenby was crying now, and I am glad.
It would have been like selling my June. I realized it afterward, but at that time I could only see what might happen to Harry, don't you see?
Yeah, I see, Hashniff got to his feet. I'm sure obliged to ya, ma'am.
This here is a secret between us.
Oh, I hope so, she said wearily.
I don't know why I told it to you.
That's all right, ma'am, smiled Hashniff, as he walked back to the bunkhouse, where he joined Sleepy. What was you and the Lady Chawin about, Hashniff, asked Sleepy.
Argin about raisin chickens.
She favored Plymouth Rocks and I held out for Rhode Island Reds.
And she cried for her side, eh?
Yeah, I seen her wipe her eyes.
You can lie faster than I can, Hashniff.
Hashniff grinned and headed for the stable, where they saddled their horses and started for town. They found $40 at the sheriff's office, bewailing everything.
Swan River has let out another posse, he told them.
He's got Allenby, Sepulveda, Merton, Omaha and Hoban with him, and they're heading toward Tacoma.
Dunno wherein they're going, but they're going, facile.
Swan River made me stay here, dang his old hide.
Said somebody had to protect the office.
He did not get much sympathy from Hashniff and Sleepy, so he paraded the rest of his woes, thusly.
Ed Clayton is drunk and wants to fight somebody, the big brute.
Harry Allenby is drunk enough to brag again, and he wants to help Clayton whip somebody, and there ain't nobody around here to accommodate him. Pinion Mead might fight the two of them if he got drunk enough, but Clayton, alone, is twice as big as Pinion.
So there ya are. On account of my official position I can't fight him. Any news of the lost girl?
Hashniff grinned at $40 woes and shook his head.
No news, 40. You heard anything? How the could I, said Tin here all the time.
$40 borrowed Hashniff's Durham and rolled a cigarette. It ain't none of my business, he said pointedly, but I was just wondering where you two fellers were when we rode up to the HB this morning. Hashniff lifted his brows slightly, but his expression remained the same. Then a smile wreathed his lips.
What makes you ask that question, 40? Curiosity.
We was late getting started, and we sure did wang out of our horses all the way. We never passed you on the road, and when you came up to us, your horses wasn't even breathing hard. $40, grinned Hashniff, you're a born detective.
Yeah. Well, I do notice some things. I kinda had a hunch that you fellers was poking around.
Swan River wondered why you wasn't there to join the posse, and I told him that you wasn't the kind to run in packs.
I reckon that's true, laughed Hashniff. Swan River didn't say when he'd be back, did he? He didn't know. Everybody expects him to be heading a searchin' party, so he's doing it.
He was just ready to start when Allenby rode in, so they took him along.
I reckon Clayton didn't know they were going.
Anyway, he didn't go along. They invited $40 to go over to the Elk Saloon with them, but he declined. Swan River had told $40 to stay at the office, which meant in town, but $40 translated it literally, and gloried in his martyrdom. Harry Allenby was at the Elk, still wearing his bandage, which was slightly disarranged, and he was more than partly drunk. Hashniff took him aside and advised him to go home, but Harry would have none of Hashniff's advice. "You ain't runnin' my business," he told Hashniff angrily.
"I do as I please."
"That's your whole trouble," said Hashniff.
"You're just a fool kid, without brains enough to pound sand into a rat hole. You go on home and quit spendin' money that don't belong to you." The shot went home.
Harry's eyes blinked for a moment and he had difficulty in swallowing, but he tried to bluff.
"What do you mean by that?" he demanded. "You know what I mean, Harry. If you want me to tell it, I'll tell it loud enough for everyone to hear." "Who told you that?"
Harry's voice was hoarse with anxiety.
"Who told me what?" asked Hashniff.
That Harry hesitated, trying to clear his thoughts. "That I was spending money that didn't belong to me," he finished lamely.
"It's a lie, anyway."
"It's the truth, kid," Hashniff spoke softly and with conviction.
"Your mother wants you to come home." "Ah." Harry turned away and walked outside.
For several minutes he stood on the porch of the saloon, thinking it over, but decided that he didn't want to go home, so he walked up to the White Horse Saloon and went inside.
There were few men in the Elk.
3 cowpunchers were playing a game of freeze-out at one of the tables, while Snowy Garnett and a railroad contractor were playing two-handed stud. Hashniff and Sleepy drifted to the pool table and began playing bottle pool. Their game was about half finished when Harry came back, and with him was Ed Clayton. Clayton had been drinking, but he was not drunk. He and Harry had a drink together, and were at the bar when Hashniff and Sleepy put up their cues. Hashniff noticed that both of them were serious, and as Hashniff approached the bar, Clayton stepped in front of him. In spite of Hashniff's height, Clayton was half a head taller, and weighed at least 50 pounds more. "Who told you that I loaned Harry money?" asked Clayton angrily.
Hashniff squinted coldly at Clayton and said, "I didn't say you did, Clayton." "You didn't?" Clayton whirled on Harry. "Didn't you say he told you that, Harry?" "Why, that's what he meant, Ed." "He didn't." Clayton turned back to Hashniff. "Where did you get this misinformation, Hartley?"
"I don't reckon I was misinformed," smiled Hashniff easily.
"It kinda looks like Harry had proved it."
"I didn't say who he got the money from, but he did."
"Is that so?" Clayton sneered openly.
"Well, I just want to tell you that it's none of your business, Hartley. You are taking too much for granted, and I want you to keep your face out of my business, or I'll bust it wide open."
"Your business?" asked Hashniff innocently.
"That won't take much, because it's already beginning to crack." Clayton was rather a sudden sort of person, and believed in the theory that the first punch wins.
This tall, skinny puncher was only 3 feet away, slouched easily, when Clayton's left fist snapped straight for his jaw.
But that easy slouch was misleading, and allowed Hashniff to sway aside while the blow merely swished into empty air. Hashniff did not lift his hands, but he did step back with a grin on his lips.
Clayton blinked and recovered his balance.
It was the first time he had missed with the snappy left, which was his stock in trade, and usually put him in a good position to finish the fight without much opposition. The card games ceased immediately. Harry started forward, only to have Sleepy kick his feet from under him and drop him in a sitting position half under a table.
"Get a front seat," grunted Sleepy.
Clayton forced a smile to cover his chagrin. He did not expect this cowpuncher to put up a fight. "Ya hadn't ought to telegraph your punch," grinned Hashniff. "A one-punch fighter like you ought to figure out a system, Clayton. You tried to sneak one on me, but your eyes and the whole left side of you told me what you was going to do."
"Did, eh?" Clayton smiled grimly as he fell into a crouch. "Stop this one."
He darted at Hashniff, smashing with both hands.
It was a disastrous attack. His right fist snapped against the top of Hashniff's head, the left missed entirely,
and Clayton went backward, half doubled up from a punishing smash in the stomach. He backed out of range, his mouth wide open, as he tried to pump air into his lungs. Hashkniff laughed and shook his head. "Go in and get him, cowboy," advised Sleepy.
"He's whipped right now."
"Like he is," snorted Clayton, shutting his teeth, and trying to strain the kinks out of his midriff. "Well, come on and finish it," invited Hashkniff. "If I wanted to whip ya, I'd have stopped the fight before this, but it ain't no fight of my making, Clayton." Clayton was game, but wary. He had tasted one of Hashkniff's punches, and did not care for another of the same kind, so he elected to try the long-range game. He felt that this cowpuncher knew nothing about boxing. Someone shoved a table away to give them more room, and Harry Allenby crawled on his hands and knees to the bar rail, where he sat down, closely watched by Sleepy. Clayton went in slowly, balanced easily on the balls of his feet, his guard high.
Hashkniff watched him calmly, guard down.
It seemed to anger Clayton to think that this lanky person did not take the fight seriously enough to put up his hands. Clayton stepped in range, snapping his left at Hashkniff's head. It was rather a weak attempt and Hashkniff avoided it easily as he stepped inside the blow, blocked Clayton's right, and drove another punch to Clayton's middle. It was enough to cause Clayton to drop his guard and step back, but this time the lanky cowboy stepped with him, and before Clayton could lift a hand to stop it, Hashkniff uppercut him to the point of his jaw, with a full sweeping blow, and the fight ended. Clayton collapsed heavily, rolled over on his back and stared at the ceiling. "The most complete thing I ever seen," declared Snowy Garnett, leaving the table and walking to the fallen man. "I knew that Clayton would get whipped someday, but I thought it would take a bigger man than he is." The bartender threw a little water into Clayton's face, and he sat up, gasping. It was a full minute before he realized what had happened. He got painfully to his feet, leaned on the bar for a while, trying to regain his balance, and walked outside, without a word. Harry Allenby followed him, rather disconsolately. His idol had fallen, and fallen hard. No one asked Hashkniff what started the fight. Snowy invited everyone to have a drink, and waited on them personally. There had been no loud talking, no swearing. A man could have stood out in front of the saloon and not been aware of trouble within. "I've paid $20 to see a fight that wasn't half as good," declared the contractor. "Here's to one cowpuncher that don't need to shoot his man to win." Hashkniff and Sleepy left the saloon as soon as possible after the toast. Hashkniff disliked adulation and he did not want to drink anymore, so they excused themselves and went back to the sheriff's office, where Sleepy proceeded to tell $40 about the fight. "Just my darned luck," wailed $40. "Here I been layin' on my miserable back, readin' Deserted at the Altar, while there's a fight just across the street. That ain't no way to treat a friend. And ya knocked dead Clayton out. Can't get it through head, facile. Biggeran you are, every way. Don't know the first thing about fightin'," declared Sleepy. "Clumsy as a cub bear." Hashkniff slapped him in the stomach and took all the fight out of him. "Yaller as a dandelion." $40 was not convinced. "I've seen him put up a good fight." "Well, I've always said that he'd meet his match some of these days. I used to be a fighter himself, and I know." "Did you meet your match?" asked Sleepy. "Did I? Say, I met a whole dongate box of 'em. What did Harry think of the fight?" "I kicked him into a front seat," grinned Sleepy. "I reckon he wanted to referee, but we didn't need none. When they tackle old Hashkniff, there ain't but one decision to give. He just pets 'em on the chin, facile." "Bragdon is bad, but lying in Bragdon at the same time is worse," declared Hashkniff. "Your loop is dragon dot." "All right," laughed Sleepy. "If you don't believe me, $40, ask Ed Clayton." "I'll take your word for it." "Are you familiar with the 27A brand?" asked Hashkniff. "Me?" 40 seemed amazed. "Say, I've been in this country ever since the big trade between the Injuns and the soldiers." "What big trade was that?" asked Sleepy innocently. "Lead FR lead. What do you want to know about the 27A? Where do they brand?" "Right shoulder. The 7 and the A are connected." "Aha," Hashkniff nodded solemnly, and walked to the door. He could see Ed Clayton and Harry Allenby in front of the White Horse Saloon, and as he watched them, Clayton drew back his right hand and knocked Harry into the street. It was not a knockout punch, but it sent Harry rolling into the dust. He clawed his way to his feet and went staggering across the street.
Hashniff called Sleepy and $40 to the door and told them about it.
Clayton went back into the saloon, while Harry sat down on the sidewalk in front of the general store. Harry seems to get it from all sides, observed $40. His luck is running kinda muddy this week. Harry leaned against a post and seemed content to stay where he was. In a few minutes Pinion Meat came out of the White Horse, got his horse at the hitch rack and rode out of town toward the 27A.
The three men at the sheriff's office went inside and sat down again. It was hot out there in the street.
Hashniff tilted back against the wall in his chair and made pencil notes on the back of an envelope, while Sleepy and $40 started an argument as to who won the Boer War. It was a perfectly good argument, because neither of them knew just what countries had fought the war.
Sleepy contended that the Swedes were the winners, and managed to prove it to $40's satisfaction.
Several points were proved by Hashniff, who was so engrossed in his own notes that he yesed every question. Just before dark Swan River rode into Moolock, leading a thoroughly tired posse of men. Their long ride had netted them nothing. They had come back past the 27A ranch, where Sam Bass had left the posse. Allenby was discouraged. He asked for Harry and found that Harry had gone home. Clayton, showing no ill effects from his fight, talked with Allenby, after which he got his horse and rode away with him toward the ranch.
Swan River stretched his tired body and swore witheringly at his luck. "We went plumb to Tacoma," he said. "It's like huntin' for a needle in a straw stack. Didn't find out a Dawngate thing."
"I reckon Allenby is all broke up over it, but I can't help it, if he is."
"Let's eat," suggested $40.
"There ain't been much happened around here since you left, except that Hashniff had a fight with Clayton, knocked Clayton plumb out, and Clayton hit Harry Allenby later on.
Otherwise it's been Sunday all day."
Swan River gawped foolishly at this information, but thought it was a joke and refused to question $40. But he soon discovered that it was no joke. They went to the Blue Front for supper and heard the bartender of the Elk giving a vivid description of the battle. "I didn't know that there was trouble between you and Clayton," said Swan River, as they sat down.
"There wasn't," smiled Hashniff. "He just wanted to fight."
Swan River was a bit dubious over this. He knew that something must have been of sufficient import to cause such a battle, but he was willing to outwardly accept Hashniff's explanation. They ate their supper and drifted to the Elk Saloon, where they ran into Sticky Clay. He was perfectly sober. A big poker game was in progress, which interested Sleepy and $40.
Swan River got into conversation with Snowy Garnett, and Sticky Clay drew Hashniff aside.
"You ain't seen Bud Bell, have ya?" asked Sticky.
"Nope, not since we were out to the ranch." "He ain't been here today, eh?" "I don't think so. Anyway, I haven't seen him." "What's wrong?" "Nothin', I reckon. Bud rode away just after that gang was out there, and he ain't come back. Me and the old man was kinda worried."
I don't know why we are either, except that there's so much bein' raised around here." "Bud can take care of himself," said Hashniff consolingly.
"Ordinarily," conceded Sticky.
"I suppose he's all right."
"You see, Hartley, I think a lot of Bud." "Sure," Hashniff nodded seriously. "I wanted to ask you something, Clay." "Ask me something?" "All right, what is it?" "About that mix-up between you and Harry Allenby." "Did you know that Harry was gunning for you?" "Well, yeah, you might say I did."
"He was just drunk enough to be looking for trouble. Somebody mentioned it to me earlier in the evening, and then Pinion Meat led me to look out for Harry.
He said that Harry was in the White Horse, making a war talk." "I see." Thoughtfully. "Is Pinion Meat a friend of yours?" "Friend?" Sticky squinted narrowly. "No, I reckon not." "You see, a feller like me don't have friends, Hartley." "Why not, Clay?" "I dunno.
Mebbit's 'cause I work for Hank Bell, mebbit's 'cause I look like I do."
"I'm kind of a mongrel, Hartley. Folks call me a gunfighter, may mean that I'm dangerous." It's just like somebody saying to you, that dog will bite. From that time on, that dog will be a dangerous animal to you. You won't never stop to figure out that the dog is good for anything, except to bite folks. That's me. I've been branded a gunfighter, and folks never figure that I eat food like other folks, snore in sleep and wear the seats out of my pants. Hashkniff did not laugh. There was nothing humorous in Sticky Clay's simile. It was rather pathetic. I reckon I know how you feel, said Hashkniff. That's fine, nodded Sticky seriously. I reckon I'll be going, Hartley. Moolak ain't none too safe for one of the HB outfit to be found in. There ain't no news from that girl, is there? Hashkniff shook his head. Kinda tough luck, said Sticky. I'd like to feel sorry for Allenby. He turned to leave the room when Larry Neal ran in and yelled at the sheriff. Hey, Swan River. Clayton and old man Allenby just got here. They found Harry halfway between here and the half-circle cross, and brought him in. He's all shot too. The sheriff and $40 ran for the door, while there was a general exodus in that direction. Hashkniff caught Sticky by the arm and whispered in his ear. Don't tell anybody that Bud is missing. Blurted Sticky. I'd been inquiring for him before I met you. Sticky hurried away, while Hashkniff joined the crowd that were on their way to the doctor's office to see how badly Harry had been hurt. Swan River tried to keep everyone out of the house, but allowed Hashkniff to slip inside. Clayton and Allenby were at the bedside, watching the doctor make his examination, and nodded at Hashkniff. Harry had been shot 3 times and was unconscious. One bullet had ripped through the fleshy part of his left shoulder, another bored through his left shoulder, just beneath the collarbone, while the third struck lower on the left side and seemed to have skidded off a rib. Shot from in front, observed Hashkniff. Yes, said Allenby shakily. Harry fired 2 shots at whoever dropped him. When he regains consciousness we will know who shot him. And that killer was a good shot, said Hashkniff softly. He was sure shootin' at the kid's heart. Notice that all 3 of them are on the left side. Sticky Clay is a good shot, said Clayton meaningly. Hashkniff squinted at Clayton closely, but Clayton did not need his eyes. The doctor was busily engaged in cleansing the wounds, and Allenby began pacing the small room. Outside, they could hear the crowd questioning the sheriff. $40 came in to get a report from the doctor, and went back to report to the crowd. How soon will he be able to tell us about it? Asked Allenby. I don't know. The doctor shook his head. He has lost considerable blood, but the wounds are not necessarily dangerous. Thank God for that, exclaimed Allenby. Clayton got to his feet and moved over to the door. I'm going to grab a bite to eat, and then I'll be in shape to sit up here tonight, he said. Allenby nodded quickly and took Clayton's seat beside the bed. Hashkniff walked outside and headed for the Elk Saloon. The crowd had dispersed, feeling that Harry had better than a fighting chance, and many of them were back at the saloons, having a drink after the excitement. Clayton had gone straight to the Elk Bar, and Hashkniff saw him drinking with Lem Elder. Frosty Welcome, the hotel proprietor, was at the bar, drinking with Joe Egan, his clerk. Frosty grinned at Hashkniff and invited him to have a drink. I'm celebratin', he explained a trifle thickly. Birthday? Asked Hashkniff. Noshir, not birthday. I'm going out of the hotel business. Tired of it. Yesher, I'm sick of the business. Joe's going to run the hotel for me, ain't ya, Joe? And that's whatever, nodded Joe. I sure can run her, too. What are you going to do? Queried Hashkniff. Cattle. By golly, I'm a cattleman, I am. Just bought me a ranch, and I'm going to run it. Pay for it tonight. Have another drink? I'll buy this one, said Hashkniff grinning. Going to give me a good job on this ranch, ain't ya? That's a good idea, by golly, agreed Frosty. Need a good man. Shay, all joking aside, will you take a job? I can't hire ya until I own it, but I'll own it, why betcha. Here's a go. They drank and placed their glasses on the bar. Hashkniff noticed that Lem Elder had left the bar, but Clayton was still there. You must have made money in that hotel, observed Hashkniff. Sure, I made money, agreed Frosty. But I never made enough to buy a cattle outfit. I had money in the bank, I did.
I sold out a cattle ranch over in Ross Basin 3 years ago, and bought this Dongate hotel, but I banked most of the money.
I'm sick of the hotel, and I'm celebrating my recovery, I am. You going to have a big outfit? Asked Hashknif. Big enough.
I'm going to blot all them 27A cattle, and register Old Circle W Agan, I am.
Have another drink?
Hashknif managed to decline another drink, and went away, leaving Frosty and Joe in an argument as to the proper way to run a hotel. Sleepy was watching a poker game when Hashknif nudged him, and they left the place together. Hashknif led the way to their horses and they rode out of town, heading northeast.
Sleepy did not question him now.
He knew that Hashknif had discovered something and that he would tell about it at the right time.
Going to rain, observed Sleepy, as they traveled over the road which led to Tacoma.
Wish we had our slickers.
I hate to get wet. Worse things than getting wet, grunted Hashknif.
Rain clouds blotted out the light from the sky, and they were forced to let the horses make their own way over the road. A wind was blowing in from the northeast, filling their faces with dust from the road. But this discomfort did not last long. A dazzling flash of lightning, a crash of thunder, and the rain drifted into them in a solid wall of water, which quickly turned the deep dust in a muck of mud. They bowed their heads to the downpour and went on.
Let up pretty soon, yelled Hashknif consolingly.
But the storm had no intention of letting up.
The lightning and thunder went rumbling away down the valley, but the rain elected to stay.
It was nearly 2 hours after their departure from Moolock. Both cowboys were soaked to the skin, and Sleepy was beginning to grow profanely sarcastic, but Hashknif said nothing in return. Hashknif was riding on the right side of the road, peering at the fence, which bordered the road. He had been riding thus for several miles, and now he grunted thankfully, as the outlines of a gate caught his eye, and a road turned through it at almost right angles to the one they had been following.
Come on, he said. Here's where we turn, cowboy. Thank for anything, exploded Sleepy. The water is running out of my boot tops right now.
Half a mile off the main road, as they were passing through a brushy spot, Hashknif swung his horse into Sleepy's animal, forcing both animals into the brush and off the road. A few moments later a rider loomed up in the rain, and went past them, heading toward the main road. It was impossible to distinguish the identity of the rider. They were about to move back into the road, when another rider, this one traveling at a gallop, went past their hiding place, fairly splashing them with mud. It was evident that this later rider was anxious to overtake the other.
Now that the Mudhen parade has gone past, said Sleepy suggestively. We go on, said Hashknif quickly. It can't be far to the ranch. Meb, I've made a mistake, but I don't think so.
About 200 yards farther on they came to the blacker bulk of corrals and outbuildings. From there they could see an open doorway, where the light from an oil lamp illuminated part of a buckboard and team, which was standing close to the porch. They rode up and dismounted. No one was in sight, but as they entered the house a voice called from the kitchen.
What in is the matter now?
Hashknif grinned at Sleepy, but did not reply. A moment later the speaker stepped into the room, a look of surprise on his face. He was a medium-sized individual, with a hooked nose and a scraggly beard.
His clothes consisted of a badly worn blue suit, a moth-eaten fedora hat and yellow boots.
Also worthy of mention was a batwing celluloid collar, of about 16 size, while the neck it encircled would have had plenty of freedom in a 14. Circling his waist, mostly hidden by his coat, was a heavy cartridge belt, studded with ammunition, and below the edge of the coat protruded the end of a revolver holster.
In his left hand he carried an old, yellow valise, bulging full. "Huh," he exclaimed explosively. "Where'd you fellers come from?"
Hashknif did not reply, as he squinted around the room. His gaze came back to the man with the valise, and he said,
"Yo re the cook, ain't ya?" "Yeah, I'm the cook." "That's fine," grinned Hashknif, slapping his wet thighs. "We are hungry as, pardner." "Faso?"
The cook leaned against the wall negligently.
"Well, you're about half out of luck, gents. Right now I ain't got no time to do any cooking. I'm the only one at the ranch, and I'm going to town right away. Sorry, but it's got to be done." We'll pay ya for the food, said Hashkniff, ignoring the cook's statement. Will ya? The cook scowled impatiently. Like I said before, I'm going to town, and I'm locking up everything, sabe?
I heard ya, Hashkniff's tone changed entirely. We'll cook our own meal, and lock up for ya.
How do you like that? Not a chance. I'd be of a feller to leave you two here alone, wouldn't I? I don't even know your names. Mine's Hashkniff Hartley.
The cook stiffened slightly at the sound of the name and his eyes shifted, as he moistened his lips. Then he shook his head.
Don't remember hearing it before, he said, trying to make his voice behave. No?
Hashkniff grinned widely. The cook shifted his feet, as he placed the valise on the floor, and his right elbow seemed to accidentally catch in his coat and throw it away from his holster. And as he straightened up, his right hand flipped to his gun. It was a swift draw, which proved that the cook's experience with pots and pans had not caused him to forget how to draw a gun, but it availed him nothing. His gun came to his waist level, but there was a nerveless finger on the trigger, nerveless because Hashkniff's bullet had hit the cook dead center before the latter's gun hardly had left its holster. The cook's gun spun over on his finger, fell to the floor, while the cook slid sidewise, almost blocking the door to the kitchen. Sleepy coughed from the powder fumes and snapped his own gun back into the holster. Neat, but not gaudy, he commented dryly. He never knowed what hit him, if that was any satisfaction, Hashkniff. Just why did he go after his gun? Scared, said Hashkniff seriously, as he stepped over and looked at the victim. My name got him, Sleepy. If he was an honest man, it wouldn't have made him try to kill me. All right, nodded Sleepy nervously. I don't know what it's all about, but I'm for ya, tall feller. What do we shoot at next? Hashkniff stepped over the cook's body and Sleepy followed him into the kitchen, where an oil lamp gave fair illumination. It was a typical ranch house kitchen, which had been presided over by a male cook, none too clean and not at all tidy. Hashkniff looked around, and suddenly had an inspiration. He went back, got the yellow valise and opened it on the kitchen table. In it was a couple of shirts, a miscellany of underwear, socks, red neckties, and underneath all this was $1,800 in currency, mostly in $10 and $20 bills. Cookin' pays well in this country, observed Hashkniff dryly. Either that, or he has saved about 3 years' salary intact. Seems like a regular diagnosis, agreed Sleepy. Hashkniff sat down, replaced the things into the valise and rolled a cigarette, while Sleepy mechanically rolled one also and wondered just what it was all about. Hashkniff smoked slowly, as he stared at the floor, deep in thought. Suddenly he shot forward out of his chair, landed on his hands and knees on the none-too-clean floor, looking at it closely. Sleepy ducked sidewise, the instinct of self-preservation causing him to also land on his hands and knees. What is it? He demanded quickly. Get an axe, exclaimed Hashkniff. Look outside, at the woodpile, Sleepy. Take the lamp. It did not take Sleepy long to acquire the desired article. The woodpile was handy to the kitchen door, as was usual for the convenience of the cook. He handed the axe to Hashkniff. What's the idea, Hashkniff? He panted. Take a look, grinned Hashkniff. They've got their root house under the kitchen, and they've nailed the door tight. Look at the fresh bruises on the boards, cowboy, and look where they took the hinges off to make it look like it wasn't a cellar. Get back. At the risk of knocking down everything in the room, Hashkniff swung the heavy axe into the joint between the boards and tore the nails loose. Straight across one end of the former trapdoor he pried up the boards, while Sleepy ripped them loose at the other end. An odor of ancient vegetable and dry rot drifted up to them, and a rickety stairway showed that Hashkniff was right. Throwing the axe aside, Hashkniff picked up the lamp and went down the stairs, with Sleepy close behind him, peering into the cellar. Crash! Something whizzed out of the gloom and knocked the lamp out of Hashkniff's hand, showering them with glass from the smashed chimney, but fortunately extinguishing the light before it could ignite the kerosene. Then, out of the darkness came something, crashing into them, striking, kicking, taking them so unawares that they went down in a heap, trying to protect themselves in that narrow space. Hashkniff ripped out a curse that would have been a credit to a mule skinner, flung himself forward, and they all crashed to the bottom. Sleepy, can you light a match? Hashkniff's voice was muffled, strained. Sleepy managed to extricate himself from the twisting mass, bumped his head severely on something, but managed to scratch a match, which he held above his head. The air was hazy with dust, but he was able to see that Hashkniff was lying across the body of a man, whose face was a mass of dirt and blood. Sleepy squinted beyond, where a girl crouched against the wall, her white face and staring eyes turned toward the lighted match.
It was June Allenby.
Hashkniff lifted his face and looked at her. Then he slowly lifted himself from the prostrate body, which turned quickly.
It was Bud Bell.
He peered at Hashkniff, his mouth wide open, as he tried to spit out the dirt he had accumulated. "Well," said Hashkniff slowly, "we're all here, it seems."
"Hartley?"
Bud's voice was a whisper. He spat out more dirt and wiped his lips with the back of his hand. Sleepy scratched more matches, handed them to Hashkniff, and ran upstairs to the living room, where he got the lamp.
"June, we're all right," panted Bud.
"These men are friends." The girl nodded slowly, helplessly.
"They've had her here quite a long time, don't you know?"
Bud felt of his head tenderly.
I went hunting for her, Hartley. I don't know what day that was. The last thing I remembered was when I was eatin' in the 27A kitchen. There wasn't nobody but me and Lou Meeker, the cook, there. I heard a funny noise. It sounded like somebody calling. I asked Lou what it was, I think. Then something hit me, I reckon. Anyway, I woke up down here. "Let's go upstairs," suggested Hashkniff.
"I don't like the smell of old vegetables."
"Can you walk, Miss Allenby?"
She nodded and made a brave attempt, but failed. Hashkniff caught her in his arms and carried her up the stairs, while Sleepy and Bud followed them to the living room, where Hashkniff placed her on a rickety old couch. "They had me all tied up," she said wearily.
"I got the gag loose and cried for help. In a few minutes they brought Bud down here.
I didn't know it was Bud for quite a while.
They hurt him so badly that he did not move for a long time. It was only a little while ago that we found out who each other was."
Bud had a few matches. Bud nodded in confirmation and looked at the body of the cook.
"We heard the shot," he said.
"When did they take the ropes off you, Miss Allenby?" asked Hashkniff.
"When they brought Bud down.
Then I heard them driving nails. It was awful to be down there in the dark." She shuddered and the tears came to her eyes.
"You're a dongade brave girl," applauded Hashkniff. "You ran into a holdup, didn't ya?"
She stared at Hashkniff for several moments before she nodded.
"You knew the robbers, so they had to kidnap ya, eh?"
She shut her lips tightly and shook her head.
"Then why did they take you with them?"
"She won't talk about it," said Bud.
"I asked her a dozen times."
"I dunno why, but she won't tell me."
"That's all right," nodded Hashkniff.
"Well, if it's all right," nodded Bud, "how did you fellers happen to come out here?"
"Lookin'," grinned Hashkniff, getting to his feet. "Can you drive a team?" "I sure can."
Bud's last effort to force a way out of the cellar had not exhausted his remaining strength. "I hit your lamp with an old potato," he grinned.
"It was all I could find.
There wasn't a rock nor a club down there."
"Thanks for all small favors," said Sleepy.
"That spud hit me in the neck and I've still got glass in my hair." Hashkniff put the yellow valise in the buckboard, helped June into the seat and turned the equipage over to Bud. The rain had ceased, but it left miles of soggy road for them to travel back to Moolock. "We'll spin along ahead," Hashkniff told Bud. "Make as good time as you can and tie in front of the hotel.
Let's hit the grit."
Hashkniff and Sleepy mounted, spurred into a gallop and began throwing mud, while behind them came the 27A buckboard team, rain-soaked and eager to get warm. Harry Allenby was showing no signs of returning consciousness. He had lost much blood, but the doctor was optimistic over the outcome.
Swan River Smith was as anxious as anyone for Harry to talk.
He felt sure that Harry knew who had shot him. Probably an even break was the decision of $40 at the Elk Saloon. Harry was due to get it sooner or later. If Sticky Clay hadn't misjudged his shot, Harry would now be under the little grasslets. You gotta be a dinger to hunt for trouble in this here county, and come out on top. "There's whatever, says I," declared Frosty Welcome, who was due to pass out of the picture very soon. Frosty had gazed too intently at the juice of the corn to remain perpendicular much longer. "Shush Ree," agreed Joe Egan vacantly, which proved that he had also run aground on the shoals of John Barleycorn.
Lazava drink. Was a matter with Rybody? Stop treason round.
And thus passed Joe Egan, who was to become the proprietor of the Moolock Hotel. Someone propped him up in a chair, and in a few minutes they placed Frosty Welcome on his lap. All of which was a disgraceful proceeding, especially as Frosty Welcome had agreed to consummate a deal with Joe Bass for the purchase of the 27A that night, and Frosty was in no condition to consummate anything. It seemed that Moolock County was fairly well represented in Moolock Town that night, and the drink emporiums were doing a good business.
It might also be mentioned that the games of chance were running full blast.
About 10 o'clock, which was probably the time agreed upon between Sam Bass and Frosty Welcome to complete their deal, Sam Bass entered the Elk Saloon, and found to his chagrin that one half of the deal was slumbering audibly on the lap of his hired man.
Sam Bass was mad.
He shook Frosty viciously, and was rewarded with a louder snore from Frosty and a groan from Joe. The crowd objected to having Sam annoy Frosty. $40 told Sam to get away from there, and let sleepin' dogs lay. Sam went away, swearing to himself, while Frosty cuddled down on the half-dead Joe Egan and continued to sleep deeply. Sam went back to the White Horse, where he found Lem Elder in Pinyon Mead. Ed Clayton had just come from the doctor's office and reported that there was no change in Harry's condition. He accepted a drink invitation from Sam Bass, who proceeded to tell them about Frosty Welcome. "And he say he pay me cash for ranch," said Sam cautiously. "He give me 5,000 day before yesterday, and he say he give me rest tonight, 10 o'clock.
Full too drunk now, can't wake up. How much time is there left?" Thus Lem anxiously. Sam looked at his watch. "Still got an hour and 40 minutes. But that ain't enough, I tell ya. That fool can't sober up that quick." "It's about time for Lou to show up, ain't it?" asked Pinion. "He's supposed to." "Ah, to with him." Sam Bass did not care to discuss small details. What became of Hartley and Stevens? Thus Lem Elder.
They went away right after the doctor made his examination.
"Are you sure of that?" asked Clayton. "Sure. I've been up and down both sides of the street. Their horses ain't at the racks and they ain't in none of the buildings."
Clayton and the three men from the 27A left the White Horse and went back to the Elk. Frosty Welcome had slipped from the lap of Joe Egan and was now reclining on the floor, with Joe's feet on his head. Sam Bass snorted an oath, as they turned to the bar and ordered their drinks.
Sticky Clay came in and sat down near the door. He looked more sinister than ever tonight. He knew that someone had suggested that he had met Harry Allenby and they had finished their battle, but Sticky was not going to be frightened out of town by their talk. A few minutes later Hank Bell came in. He looked around the place, saw Sticky and sat down beside him. The four men at the bar noticed these two. Lem Elder drank only half of his liquor, wiped his lips with the back of his hand and declared himself out of tobacco. "Be back in a minute," he said, and went out. At the doorway he almost bumped into Frank Allenby, who was coming in. The three men at the bar turned to look at Allenby, and those at the games hesitated in their play long enough to listen. "Harry is conscious," stated Allenby wearily. "But he refuses to tell us who shot him." The crowd murmured their wonderment, and none of them saw Hashkniff and Sleepy, muddy from their long trip, come in through the rear of the room. They came down behind a roulette layout, where half a dozen players were grouped, and stopped. "Does he know who shot him?" asked $40. Swan River entered as $40 spoke. "I'll bet he does," said Swan River. "He's protectin' somebody. If it was an even break gunfight, he don't need to be afraid to tell who got him." "Are you sure he's conscious?" asked Pinyon Mead. "Yeah, he's conscious," nodded Swan River. "It's the queerest deal I've ever been up against." "Most deals look queer," said Hashkniff, coming toward the bar. His face was splashed with mud and his clothes were sticky with the same substance. The crowd centered their attention on him now. "Where you been, Hashkniff?" asked $40. "Ridin' in the mud," grinned Hashkniff. He turned to Sam Bass. "There's some low places on your road that you ought to bridge."
A little rain makes a swamp out of M.
My bronc turned over in one of M.
In my road, queried Sam Bass.
Yeah, out that away.
I don't blame ya for wantin' to sell out.
If I had that kind of a road. Who wants to sell out?
Thus Sam Bass.
You. Frosty told me he was buying ya out tonight. Frosty?
Sam was both surprised and indignant. That's why he wanted to wake Frosty up, declared $40. I'll bet you $40 that's the reason. Sam Bass shut his lips. He did not want everyone to know that he was selling out. Clayton adjusted his necktie and started to walk away from the bar. Better stay where you are, Clayton advised Hashkniff.
You ain't going no place, you know. What do you mean?
Clayton turned and stared at Hashkniff, as though wondering what had been meant by that remark. But he stepped back against the bar. I was just thinking about something that might interest you, smiled Hashkniff.
It happened over 2 years ago. 2 years ago? Questioned Clayton. What do you know about anything that happened here 2 years ago, Hartley?
Hashkniff laughed and shifted his feet.
Some folks might call it fortune-telling, Clayton. Didn't you know that I could see into the past?
What kind of bunk is he talking anyway? Asked Sam Bass.
Do you want me to demonstrate what I mean? Asked Hashkniff.
Hop to it, laughed $40.
We'll all listen. All right. Now I'm going into a trance. Watch me closely. The games had all ceased and everyone was interested.
Hashkniff's expression did not change, except that he looked more serious.
Then he began.
I can see 2 men riding through the hills. Down in a swale a man is squattin' beside a little fire.
He has 2 cows hogtied near him.
There's a running iron and an old fry pan on the fire. He takes the hot fry pan and vents the brands on the right shoulders of the animals. He comes back to the fire, takes the running iron and draws a brand on each animal, just above where he has vented the original brands.
Then I see the 2 men again.
They see this man at the fire and he sees them. He jumps up, runs to his horse and mounts. He has lost his hat, but don't stop to get it. The men circle the hill, trying to head him off. These 2 men chase him through the hills, but he is too smart for them.
The 2 men get separated.
One of them circles back to the fire, while the other keeps on after the rustler. The one that circled back dismounts at the fire.
He looks at the animals, and then he looks all around. The fire is almost out.
He puts the pan and iron into the fire again and puts on more fuel. Then he finds the rustler's hat. I can tell by his face that he knows who owns that hat. I can't see what he did with the hat, but it disappears from the picture. When the pan is hot again he vents the brand that the rustler put on. It is a big vent now, almost covering the shoulder of both cows. Then he takes the running iron and draws a brand on each cow's right hip. Now I can see him scatter the fire, look all around, and begin to look the cows all over again. Then I see the other man ride back there, and they are both talking.
Now they ride away. I think they are talking about leaving the cows there for evidence.
Hashkniff shook his head quickly and grinned.
How do you all like that picture?
Sticky and Hank Bell had got to their feet, staring at Hashkniff, wondering what he meant, where he had secured this information. Clayton's mouth was half open and he was breathing like a man suffering from a bad cold.
What does he mean? Whispered Allenby.
I was one of those men, the one who kept on after they. What kind of foolishness is this? Demanded Clayton.
I was the other man, and there wasn't anything like.
Hank Bell was coming forward, staring at Clayton, who drew away from him.
Hold everything, Hank, advised Hashkniff.
I'd advise everybody to hold quiet. This is. Lem Elder came in through the open doorway and was halfway to the bar before he realized that the room was as quiet as a grave. He stopped suddenly, looking quickly around. His lips were twisted into a snarl and the skin seemed drawn tightly across his cheeks. He looked at Hashkniff, who was grinning at him, and his right hand opened and closed spasmodically. And that wasn't all of the picture, said Hashkniff slowly.
I might ask Lem Elder to stand perfectly still. You see, it was like this. Allenby wanted to hire a detective.
Clayton knew this, so he talked Allenby into letting him get one.
Clayton wrote a letter to a feller by the name of Seeley. Seeley didn't last long. That was a mistake, I reckon.
He wasn't supposed to be shot, but the party who shot him thought it was the right thing to do.
I've got the letter that Clayton wrote to Seeley.
What has that letter got to do with it? Asked Clayton.
I don't care who reads that letter.
You should have asked Seeley to destroy it, replied Hashkniff. That letter plumb ruined things for you, Clayton.
Ruined things?
Clayton's voice was hoarse. He was afraid, but was trying to bluff.
How did it ruin things?
Some folks don't read between the lines, Clayton, I did.
Between the lines?
Clayton's voice faltered.
Yeah.
Bud Bell went to the penitentiary, as innocent as I was of that charge.
You knew it, Clayton.
You was the man who came back to that fire and put on the HB brand.
You knew who the rustler was.
It gave you a hold over him and it put you in a position to steal Allenby's cattle. With the help of these men you stole, shipped and sold all those half-circle cross cows. The men who held up that train stole those 2 HB horses to make their getaway on, because the horses were so marked that there could be no mistake.
You shared in that holdup. I don't know why Elkins, the stage driver, was killed, but he probably tried for his gun when June Allenby accidentally rode in on the holdup. I forgot to ask her about it. Ask her about it, parroted Allenby wonderingly.
She's over at the hotel by this time, said Hashkniff.
I found her at. Look out, snapped Lem Elder. Bye, they're both over there, Sam.
We're stuck.
It took Lem Elder's statement to electrify Clayton and the 27A outfit.
Clayton threw himself away from the bar, drawing a gun from a shoulder holster, while Sam Bass, Pinionmead, and Lem Elder shifted separately, each one streaking for his gun. But they were caught between 2 fires. At the door was Hank Bell and Sticky Clay, blocking their exit in that direction, while Hashkniff and Sleepy prevented them from going out the rear. Clayton was dead on his feet before his gun was out of the holster. From beside the roulette layout, Sleepy was shooting slow and carefully, while Hashkniff flung himself against the end of the bar and shifted his gun from man to man, as he emptied it. Sam Bass went down, and across him fell Lem Elder, flinging his arms wide and knocking Pinionmead back against the bar, where he sagged for a moment before going down in a crumpled heap. The room was filled with powder smoke until faces and forms were mere indistinct things. The crowd had had no chance for a getaway, but now they vaulted the bodies and ran outside, while those from the other saloons and business places met them with a volley of questions.
Sticky Clay had been hit twice, but not badly enough to make him want a doctor.
Hashkniff's right cheek was bleeding from a splinter which had been thrown from the bar, but Sleepy had escaped without a scratch. The crowd, realizing that the fight was over, came crowding back in, questioning, coughing, wondering what it was all about. Swan River and $40 did not stampede with the crowd, and it was Swan River who first examined the 4 victims.
Sam Bass was the only one alive, still conscious, but fading fast. Shut up, roared Swan River. Sam's trying to whisper and I can't hear him.
Sam Bass was making a valiant effort to say something, but the words were slow in coming. The crowd grew silent as Sam's tongue began to function.
Money all in the valises, he whispered. Going away tonight.
Sorry, he swallowed thickly.
Sorry, shot Elkins. He went for gun. Pinion killed Seeley. I guess that's all.
I guess that's enough, said Swan River slowly, as he got to his feet and turned to Hashkniff.
I take off my hat to you, Hartley.
I dunno how you figured all this out, but you did. It wasn't so hard, said Hashkniff wearily, looking at the empty gun in his hand.
That letter was the key to it all. He drew out the letter and spread it on the bar. Skip the first line and read every other one, he said. Swan River leaned closer and read. Dear Jim.
Frank Allenby, the biggest cattleman in Moolock, is up against a very dangerous proposition and needs help. It looks like a plain case of spite work by somebody and you can make $5,000 for a few days' work. This gang of rustlers are able to pull off big jobs and get away without the slightest chance of anyone detecting them.
Your work must be done without anyone knowing who you are, sabe? I will explain everything to you when you get here. You will like Allenby. If you can't take this job, Jim, it will disappoint me greatly. If you come, keep it dark or it might make things very bad. Wire your decision. Sincerely, Ed.
And that's what Clayton meant for Seeley to read, eh? Asked $40.
Hashkniff nodded. Yeah, it seems that it was 40.
If you notice, he had all the lines pretty even, and left plenty of room at the margins. I kinda wondered about it all being so kinda regular, so I got to skip pin around for the answer.
I've heard of things like this being done before.
I got to find out a few things about Bud Bell's case, and I heard about the rustler venting the whole shoulder of them 2 cows. That wasn't according to Hoyle, and there must have been a reason.
The 27A outfit brand on the right shoulder.
There was the rustler without a hat, if you remember. If Clayton found that hat belonged to someone he wanted to protect or put the deadwood onto, what could be easier? But he first had to blot out that other brand on the shoulder and put one on the hip. The HB brand's on the hip, and the HB was already in bad with the half-circle cross.
Does it look easier now?
It sounds good, agreed Swan River, scratching his head.
But that was kind of flimsy evidence.
Worse evidence than that sent Bud Bell to prison. Somebody stole 300 head of stock out of a loading pen the night we came to Moolock. The stock cars came too late to load the night before, so they had to leave the cattle in the pens.
Sam Bass got them cars, didn't he? I started guessing from there.
They wasn't making money enough off Allenby's stock, so they started holding up trains and stages.
They had to steal June Allenby to save themselves. Down in the east of that road I found a red bead. It was just a ordinary bead like them that ornament the pockets on Sam Bass's vest. It wasn't much, but it pointed the way. Me and Sleepy found June in the cellar at the 27A ranch tonight. Bud Bell went looking for her and got knocked on the head.
They put him into the cellar with her, and nailed the door tight. I killed their cook. He knew that his cake was all dough, so he went for his gun. He had $1,800 in his valise. I reckon that about closes the chapter.
June is across the street, asked Allenby.
He had been in sort of a trance.
Yeah, she's over there, said Sleepy. They didn't hurt her. Allenby whirled and ran out. Bud came in.
He was dirty and bloody, but he knew that now he could look every man in the face. His convict brand had been wiped away. They told me about it, Hartley, he said, as he looked at the 4 men on the floor. I don't know how it was all done, but I'm glad.
I'm not much on Nankin anybody.
You don't need to thank me, Bud, 'cause you're welcome. The doctor arrived on the scene and Hashkniff walked outside with Sleepy and $40.
Over at the hotel, June Allenby was holding an impromptu reception, assisted by her father.
As soon as Allenby saw Hashkniff he left the crowd and came straight to him.
Hartley, I haven't even thanked you yet. I have had so many shocks lately that I'm not responsible for what I am doing.
June has told me something of how you found her.
My man, you don't know what you have done for me. I've got my girl back, and Harry is going to live. I tell you, I could shout for joy. Go ahead, Hashkniff smiled wearily. June was coming to them, holding out her hand to Hashkniff.
I can thank you now, she said simply.
You're welcome, Miss Allenby. He smiled at her and turned to her father. If you want to thank me real hard, Allenby, go over and make your peace with Hank Bell. You've done him an awful wrong, and this is the time to right it.
Yes, I'll do that,
said Allenby slowly. I owe him a lot of apologies, Hartley.
Perhaps I should apologize to the whole world. Before I go, I would like to ask you a question.
Who was the man who was branding the cattle, the man whose crime was placed on Bud Bell? Hashkniff squinted painfully for a moment.
It seemed that he was trying to remember. He looked at June, who was staring at him, her eyes pleading. That man, he hesitated. That man was Pinion Mead, I reckon.
I see, Allenby nodded quickly.
I'm going over to ask Bud Bell and his father to forgive me, and then I'm going to write you each a check. Allenby fairly ran across toward the Elk Saloon and June came to Hashkniff, placing a hand on his arm. Mr. Hartley, she said softly, I want to thank you for that. I guess you know why I couldn't answer your question out at the 27A ranch house.
Sam Bass told me the whole thing. Blood is thicker than justice, at a time like this. Perhaps I was thinking more of mother than of dad.
Meb I was too, said Hashkniff, smiling at her.
I reckon it will be all right from now on, ma'am.
I was sure scared of how it might end, but it's all right now.
Yes, it's all right now, thanks to you, you lovable liar. Hashkniff laughed softly and turned as Bud Bell came running from the saloon. He grasped Hashkniff by the arm, as he said,
Hartley, they're having a drink together, her dad and mine. And her dad told me to come over and take care of her, while they talked about the future.
Can you beat that?
No, you can't, Hashkniff agreed warmly.
I'm sure glad, folks.
And you take care of her, Bud. She's a game little girl, and by golly, she's worth taking care of.
Come on, Sleepy.
They turned away and walked over to the hitch rack. It was about the only place where they would be safe from questioning tongues, and neither of them had smoked a cigarette since Hashkniff had discovered the nails in the trapdoor at the 27A. Neither of them spoke until their cigarettes were nearly gone. The crowd at the Elk were helping to clean up the place. Frosty and Joe were on the sidewalk in front of the saloon, trying to get someone to explain what it was all about. Outside of Hashkniff and Sleepy, they were the only people in Moolock who were not excited. They had slept through it all. Lovable Liar, said Sleepy seriously, it comes to me that there must have been sort of an agreement between Sam Bass and Harry Allenby before Harry tried to misbrand them two cows.
Yeah, I suppose, said Hashkniff softly.
Allenby's stinginess drove the kid to steal.
Clayton saved him from the pen.
Clayton could use the kid to put him in with the 27A, and together they robbed Allenby blind.
But it seems like they kind of fell out all around.
Clayton hired Seeley, without telling Sam Bass and Harry.
Seeley was the victim of a mistake.
Probably Harry told Bass that Seeley was a detective, not knowing that Clayton had hired him.
Mab Clayton and Seeley had something framed up for themselves.
Clayton had trouble with M, probably over June's part of the deal, and one of M tried to kill Clayton. I reckon that Harry was dangerous to their game.
He drank and talked too much.
Very likely he knew where June was, and threatened to talk if they didn't let her loose. That was why they tried to kill him. It kinda looks like they all knew that this three-handed game was a losing proposition. When I heard that Sam Bass was selling out to Frosty Welcome tonight, I knew that my cards were all aces.
It was just another case of too many cooks, Sleepy.
The 27A outfit had it all fixed to skip out of the country tonight.
I reckon they were all going to pull out on that midnight train.
I had to guess at quite a lot of things, but I had enough straight dope to tie up the weak spots.
Hashkniff threw away his cigarette and leaned against the hitch rack. Sleepy, do you know the only way to be halfway successful as a crook?
Yeah, nodded Sleepy.
I know two ways.
No, you don't, cowboy, there's only one way.
There's two, Hashkniff. One way is to play a lone hand.
All right, agreed Hashkniff.
What's the other one? To kill you when you first show up in the country. Hashkniff laughed softly and began rolling another cigarette.
That's appreciation, partner.
I think more of that than I do of Allenby's check.
It ain't my policy to shift guilt onto a dead man, but I reckon it won't hurt Pinion Mead's soul to have an extra cattle rustling charge on the books against him. It won't hurt him, but it will save a lot of heartaches down here, so I'll let him chalk one more lie against my record. June knows the truth, and Meb that'll keep Harry going straight. It kinda levels things out for Hank and Bud, so I reckon we come out just about even. They left the hitch rack, going back toward the store, and ran into Swan River Smith. Been looking all over for ya, he said.
Allenby wants ya. Him and Hank Bell had 6 drinks apiece and Allenby is going to buy out the HB outfit, make Bud foreman and here's a couple of checks to give ya and you're going to be best man at a weddin', and only knows what they ain't figured out. Them two jiggers sure do work fast. You'd think they was long separated brothers, honest, you would. Somebody told Harry how it all came out, and he wants you to come down right away, and say, you fellers can have Moolock if you want it. Hashkniff took the checks and handed one to Sleepy.
We'll be over there as soon as we put up our horses, Swan River.
Well, alright. Make it as soon as you can.
Hashkniff and Sleepy hurried to the rack, mounted their horses, and Hashkniff led the way out of town, heading south, passing the livery stable. "Where are we going to put up our horses?" asked Sleepy. "Probably in the next town we come to," grinned Hashkniff.
Best man at a weddin', eh? Not me, cowboy.
"I'm hunting for a place where I can settle down in peace."
Mulak don't need us at a weddin'.
And so they faded out of the Mulak country, heading into unknown ranges, leaving behind them a lot of grateful people who waited for them in vain. They had brought happiness to those who deserved it, and to one who, in the eyes of society, possibly did not deserve it. But the eyes of society were of little consequence to Hashkniff and Sleepy, the lovable liar, and his innocent-eyed partner.
The checks were for $2,500 each.
All of which, as Hashkniff remarked, proved that Allenby did not get financially overjoyed. "That's all right," stated Sleepy, as they drifted along under the stars.
"We're lucky to get anything, Hashkniff." "How's that, Sleepy?"
He offered the money for a conviction, which he did not get, and which also proves that Allenby was just a little excited. He might have made it a point to argue over.
And that brings us to the end of our story. Thank you for listening to Old Story Audiobook.
If you loved this audiobook, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story.